the sleepy village of St. Mary Mead, a priceless sapphire necklace vanishes from Gossington Hall, stolen under the noses of its glittering guests, who dared to cross the bantries. Why is the butler trembling, and what secrets hide in the church's shadowed pews? Enter Miss Jane Marple, a quiet spinster with a razor-sharp mind, unravelling a web of blackmail, coded notes, and a sinister smuggling ring. From a postmaster's ledger to a London auction house, her clues expose a syndicate stretching from St. Mary Mead to Bristol's dark alleys. But as the necklace returns, a new face lurks in the village. Could another mystery be brewing? Will Miss Marple's brilliance triumph again, or has she only scratched the surface of a deeper plot? The clock ticks, and St. Mary Mead holds its breath. Chapter 1. The Whisper in St. Mary Mead. The morning sun filtered through the lace curtains of St. Mary Mead's tea shop, casting delicate patterns on the polished wooden tables. The air was thick with the scent of freshly baked scones, mingled with the faint bitterness of brewing tea. It was a typical Tuesday in the village, where the rhythm of life moved as predictably as the church clock's chime. Yet, for Miss Jane Marple, seated in her usual corner by the window, her knitting needles clicking rhythmically, the day held the promise of something far less ordinary. Miss Marple, with her soft white hair and deceptively mild blue eyes, was a fixture in St. Mary Mead, as much a part of the village as the ancient yew tree in the churchyard. To the casual observer, she was merely an elderly spinster, fond of her garden and her knitting, her days filled with the gentle monotony of village life. But those who knew her well few, though they were understood that beneath her unassuming exterior lay a mind as sharp as the needles in her hands, capable of unravelling mysteries that baffled even the most seasoned detectives. The tea shop, known as Mrs. Puddicombe's, was the heart of village gossip, a place where secrets were traded as freely as sugar cubes. Today the room buzzed with a particular fervour, the kind that only a scandal could ignite. Miss Marple's ears, attuned to the subtlest shifts in tone, caught fragments of the conversation at the table nearest her, where Mrs. Price, the butcher's wife, held court with her usual entourage of eager listeners. "It's the Bantry necklace. Mark my words," Mrs. Price said, her voice low but carrying the weight of certainty. "Gone, just like that, during their grand gala last week. A sapphire the size of a pigeon's egg, they say, set in diamonds, worth a king's ransom, and now poof, vanished." Mrs. Hartnell, a stout woman with a penchant for dramatic gasps, leaned forward, her teacup forgotten. "Vanished? You don't mean stolen, surely? Not at the Bantry estate. Why, Colonel Bantry would have the thief's head on a pike." "Oh, stolen, all right," Mrs. Price continued, relishing the attention. "They're saying it was one of the staff. You know how these things go. Servants get ideas above their station, start thinking they can pocket a fortune and slip away to London. My Bert heard it from the milkman, who heard it from the Bantry's gardener. They're all in a tizzy up at the manor." Miss Marple's needles paused for the briefest moment, her fingers still as she absorbed the words. A stolen necklace, a grand gala, and suspicion falling on the Stafford was the sort of puzzle that stirred her curiosity, like a ripple disturbing the surface of a still pond. She resumed her knitting, her eyes drifting to the young waiter, Alfred, who was clearing plates at a nearby table. His movements were quick, almost too quick, and when Mrs. Price mentioned the necklace again, his head jerked slightly, as if stung by an invisible bee. Miss Marple noted the flush creeping up his neck, the way his eyes darted toward the door before returning to his task. Interesting, she thought, her lips curving into the faintest of smiles. Very interesting indeed. The conversation at Mrs. Price's table continued, each woman adding her own embellishment to the tale. Miss Weatherby, a thin, bird-like woman with a sharp nose, suggested the thief might be a guest, not a servant. You know how these society types are, she said, her voice dripping with disdain. All charm and polish, but sticky fingers when no one's looking. I heard there was an art dealer at the gala, some fellow from London. What's to say he didn't slip the necklace into his pocket? An art dealer. Mrs. Hartnell's eyes widened. Oh, that's rich. Imagine swanning in with his fancy talk and walking out with the Bantry's treasure. What was his name, do you know? Mr. Lyle, I think, Mrs. Price said, tapping. Her chin, handsome, they say, with a silver tongue. My Bert saw him in the village the day after, buying a paper at Gibbs's shop. Looked mighty pleased with himself, Bert said. Miss Marple filed the name away. Mr. Lyle, art dealer, possibly from London. She glanced again at Alfred, who was now wiping down a table with unnecessary vigour. His hands trembled slightly, and when a customer called for more tea, he nearly dropped the cloth. Miss Marple's mind began to weave a thread, connecting the waiter's unease to the whispers of theft. It was too early to draw conclusions, of course, but she had learned long ago that human nature was as predictable as the seasons, and fear often betrayed guilt or knowledge of it. She sipped her tea, the delicate porcelain cup warm against her fingers, and considered her next move. The Bantry estate, Gossington Hall, was a short walk from the village, and she was on friendly terms with Colonel and Mrs. Bantry. Dolly Bantry, in particular, was a dear friend, prone to exuberant gestures and a touch of absent-mindedness, but fiercely loyal and always eager for Miss Marple's company. A visit to Gossington Hall would be perfectly natural, a neighbourly call to check on Dolly after the upheaval of the theft, and, perhaps, an opportunity to observe the household firsthand. Miss Marple finished her tea, tucked her knitting into her basket, and rose, smoothing her tweed skirt. The tea shop was still humming with gossip as she stepped outside, the bell above the door jingling softly. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of autumn leaves and wood smoke. St. Mary Mead lay before her, its thatched cottages and tidy gardens basking in the golden light. To an outsider, it was the picture of tranquility, but Miss Marple knew better. Beneath the surface, secrets stirred, and she had a knack for coaxing them into the open. The walk to Gossington Hall took her along the high street, past the post office where Mr. Gibbs, the postmaster, was sweeping the step. He nodded to her, his smile as bland as ever, but Miss Marple's eyes lingered on him for a moment. Postmasters saw everything: letters, parcels, the comings and goings of strangers. If Mr. Lyle had been in the village, Mr. Gibbs would know more than he let on. She made a mental note to speak with him later, perhaps under the guise of posting a letter to her nephew Raymond. Gossington Hall stood at the edge of the village, a sprawling Georgian manor surrounded by manicured lawns and ancient oaks. As Miss Marple approached, she saw the gardener, old Mr. Tuttle, clipping a hedge with his usual methodical care. He tipped his cap to her, his weathered face creasing into a smile. "Morning, Miss Marple," he said. "Come to see Mrs. Bantry." "Have you? She's in a right state, what with the necklace and all." "Good morning, Mr. Tuttle," Miss Marple replied, her voice gentle. "Yes, I thought I'd pay a call. Such a dreadful business, isn't it?" "Dreadful's the word," he said, shaking his head. "Never thought I'd see the day when thieves walked among us at Gossington. Makes you wonder who you can trust, Indeed, it does, Miss Marple said, her tone sympathetic but her mind alert. Were you at the gala, Mr. Tuttle? It must have been quite the event. Oh, I was there, helping with the lanterns and such. Grand affair it was, till the necklace went missing. Saw that art dealer fellow, Lyle, sniffing about the display cases. Didn't like the look of him, if you ask me. Miss Marple nodded, storing the information away. Thank you, Mr. Tuttle. I shan't keep you from your work, she continued. Up the drive, her steps light but purposeful. The front door was opened by Thomas, the butler, a tall man with a stiff posture and a face that betrayed no emotion except, Miss Marple noticed, a faint tightening round his mouth when she mentioned the gala. He led her to the drawing-room, where Dolly Bantry was pacing, her auburn hair slightly askew and her hands fluttering like startled birds. Jane, Dolly exclaimed, rushing forward to clasp Miss Marple's hands. Oh, you're a sight for sore eyes. This whole business with the necklace has me in knots. Arthur's beside himself, and the staff are tiptoeing about like they're walking on eggshells. Miss Marple settled into a chintz-covered armchair, her basket at her feet. My dear Dolly, I heard the news at the tea shop. Tell me everything. Dolly launched into a breathless account of the gala glittering evening of music. Champagne and distinguished guests, marred by the discovery that the Bantry necklace, displayed proudly in a velvet case, had vanished some time between the dessert course and the final toast. The police had been called, but their questions had yielded little, and suspicion had fallen on the staff, particularly the newer members. There's Clara, the maid, who's only been with us a month, Dolly said, wringing her hands, and Alfred, the footman, though he's such a sweet boy, I can't believe he'd do it. And then there's Thomas, who's been with us for years, but he was acting so oddly that night, always hovering near the display case. Miss Marple listened, her face a mask of polite concern, but her mind was racing. Clara, Alfred, Thomas and Mr. Lyle, the art dealer, who seemed to appear in every account. She thought of Alfred's nervous glance in the tea shop, Thomas's tight-lipped expression, and the whispers of a sapphire worth a fortune. The pieces were scattered, but she could sense the shape of the puzzle forming. Dolly, she said at last, might I see the room where the necklace was kept? It would help me understand the situation better. Dolly, eager for any assistance, led her to the library, where the display case stood empty, its glass gleaming mockingly in the sunlight. Miss Marple examined the case, noting its sturdy lock, and the faint scratch marks near the hinge marks that suggested a practiced hand, not a clumsy opportunist. She asked a few careful questions about the gala's guests, learning that Mr. Lyle had been particularly attentive to the necklace, admiring it openly before the theft was discovered. As they returned to the drawing-room, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the village. St. Mary Mead was small, but its secrets were not. She would need to tread carefully, observing and listening, letting the threads of the mystery weave themselves together. The gala was to be followed by a smaller dinner party in a few days, and Dolly, with a hopeful gleam in her eye, invited Miss Marple to attend. Oh, do come, Jane, she said. You've such a knack for noticing things. Perhaps you'll see something we've missed. Miss Marple smiled, her eyes twinkling. I'd be delighted, Dolly, and who knows, perhaps we'll get to the bottom of this little mystery. As she walked back to the village, her basket swinging lightly at her side, Miss Marple felt the familiar thrill of the chase. The necklace was more than a stolen trinket, was a key to a web of motives and deceptions, and she was determined to unlock it. Alfred's nervousness, Thomas's odd behavior, Mr. Lyle's charm, and the whispers of the village all pointed to a truth waiting to be uncovered. For now, she would watch and wait, her knitting needles ready to stitch together the clues. The sun was dipping below the horizon as she reached her cottage, the roses in her garden glowing in the fading light. Miss Marple paused at the gate, her mind already spinning with possibilities. The whisper in St. Mary Mead had set her on a path, and she had no doubt it would lead her to the heart of the mystery. Chapter 2. The Bantry's Burden. The afternoon sun bathed Gossington Hall in a golden glow, its rays catching the ivy that clung to the Georgian Manor's stone facade. Miss Jane Marple walked up the gravel drive, her sensible shoes crunching softly, her knitting basket swinging lightly at her side. The visit was, on the surface, a simple act of neighbourly concern, prompted by the whispers of the stolen Bantry necklace that had electrified St. Mary Mead's tea shop the previous day. But Miss Marple's motives ran deeper. Her sharp mind, hidden behind a gentle smile and twinkling blue eyes, was already threading together the clues. Alfred's nervous glance, the mention of an art dealer named Mr. Lyle, and the village's fevered speculation about an inside job. The grand oak door opened before she could knock, revealing Thomas, the butler, his face as impassive as a marble bust. Yet Miss Marple, ever observant, noted the slight twitch at the corner of his mouth, a flicker of unease that belied his polished demeanour. "Good afternoon, Miss Marple," he said, his voice smooth but clipped. "Mrs. Bantry is in the morning room." "I'll show you in, thank you, Thomas," Miss Marple replied, her tone warm but her eyes lingering on him a moment longer than necessary. As he led her through the hall, she took in the familiar elegance of Gossington polished parquet floors, ancestral portraits, and the faint scent of beeswax. But there was a tension in the air, a subtle discord that hung like a mist over the household. The morning room was a cheerful space, with chintz, curtains, and a view of the rose garden, but Dolly Bantry's pacing disrupted its calm. Her auburn hair was pinned haphazardly, and her hands fluttered as she turned to greet her guest. "Jane, oh, you're an angel for coming," she exclaimed, rushing forward to clasp Miss Marple's hands. "This wretched business with the necklace has turned everything topsy-turvy. Arthur's growling like a bear, and I'm at my wit's end." Miss Marple settled into a cushioned chair, placing her basket at her feet. "My dear Dolly, I couldn't stay away after hearing the news. Now, tell me everything, from the beginning." Dolly sank onto the sofa, her energy deflating like a punctured balloon. "It was the gala, Jane, last Saturday. You know how Arthur loves his party's music, champagne, the whole county invited. We had the necklace on display in the library, in that dreadful glass case Arthur insists on using. It's a family heirloom, you see, a sapphire as big as your thumb, surrounded by diamonds, been in the Bantry family for generations. We thought it would be a treat for the guests to see it." Miss Marple nodded, her knitting needles clicking softly as she pulled them from her basket. "And when did you notice it was missing?" "Not until the end of the night," Dolly said, her voice rising with frustration. The gala went splendidly, dancing laughter, everyone in high spirits. I checked the case during the dessert course, and the necklace was there, gleaming under the lights. But by the time we said goodnight to the last guest, around midnight, it was gone. Vanished, Jane, without a trace." Miss Marple's needles paused, her mind picturing the scene. A crowded room, glittering with candlelight and jewels, the case in a corner, perhaps momentarily unwatched. Was the case locked? She asked. "Oh yes," Dolly said. "Arthur's very particular about that." The key stays with him or Thomas. But when we checked, the lock was intact, no scratches, no signs of tampering. The police came the next morning, but they found nothing. They think it must be one of the staff, though I can't bear to believe it." Miss Marple's eyes softened with sympathy, but her thoughts were racing. An intact lock suggested a key had been used. A skilled hand had bypassed it entirely. Who had access to the key that night? Only Arthur and Thomas, Dolly said. And Thomas was run off his feet, managing the staff and the guests. I can't imagine he had time to sneak off and steal anything. But then there's Clara, the new maid. She's only been with us a month, and she was helping in the library that night. And Alfred, the footman, though he's such a dear boy. Oh, Jane, I don't know what to think." Miss Marple noted the names, her memory flicking back to Alfred's unease in the tea shop. "And the guests?" she asked gently. "Anyone unfamiliar, perhaps?" Dolly's face brightened, as if relieved to shift suspicion away from her household. "Well, there was Mr. Lyle, the art dealer from London. Charming man, very knowledgeable about jewels. He was admiring the necklace all evening, asking Arthur about its history. He's staying at the Blue Boar in the village, you know, says. He's scouting for antiques in the area. But surely a man like that wouldn't stoop to theft." Miss Marple's smile was non-committal, but her mind seized on Mr. Lyle. The tea-shop gossip had painted him as handsome and self-assured, a stranger in a village where strangers stood out. His interest in the necklace, coupled with his profession, was too neat a coincidence to ignore. "He sounds fascinating," she said. "Anyone else catch your eye?" Dolly frowned, tapping her fingers on the arm of the sofa. "Not really. Most were our usual sets: Sir Henry Clithering, the vicar, the Weatherbys. Oh, and a few cousins of Arthur's from Devon, but they're hardly the thieving sort. The police asked for a guest list, but it's all so muddled. I keep thinking I've forgotten someone, but I can't put my finger on it." Miss Marple leaned forward slightly, her voice soothing. "You've had a shock, Dolly. These things take time to settle in the mind. Perhaps a look at the guest list later might jog your memory." Dolly nodded, her eyes grateful. "You're right, Jane. You always know how to make sense of things. Would you like to see the library? It might help you picture it." Miss Marple agreed, and Dolly led her down a corridor lined with hunting trophies and faded tapestries. The library was a handsome room, with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and a massive fireplace. The display case stood near a window, its glass gleaming in the afternoon light. Miss Marple approached it, her eyes scanning the lock and hinges. The scratch marks she'd noticed on her previous visit were still there, faint but deliberate, suggesting a tool had been used with care. She ran a finger along the edge, her touch light, and asked, "Was the case moved at all during the gala?" "No," Dolly said. "It's too heavy. Thomas dusted it that morning, and it stayed put until the theft was discovered." Miss Marple nodded, filing the detail away. Thomas again, always near the scene. She turned to the room, imagining it filled with guests' laughter, clinking glasses, the rustle of silk gowns. The case would have been a focal point, drawing, admiring glances, but also vulnerable in the bustle of the evening. "And Mr. Lyle," she said casually, "where was he when you last saw the necklace?" Dolly tilted her head, thinking. "He was in here, I think, talking to Arthur about some painting we have in the hall. He was very curious about the house, kept asking about the history of the furnishings. I thought it was just his trade, you know art dealers are always poking about." Miss Marple's lips curved into a faint smile. Poking about, indeed. She glanced out the window, where Mr. Tuttle was now raking leaves, his movements slow and deliberate. The gardener's comment about Lyle sniffing about echoed in her mind. Another thread in the tapestry she was weaving. They returned to the morning room, where Thomas had set out a tray of tea and biscuits. As he poured, Miss Marple watched him closely, noting the precision of his movements, the way his eyes avoided hers. When he left the room, she leaned toward Dolly and said, "Thomas seems a steady sort. How long has he been with you?" "Years," Dolly said, nibbling a biscuit. "Since before Arthur inherited the estate. He's indispensable, really, though he's been a bit off since the gala. I think the police questioning him upset him. They asked him about the key, you see, and he was quite indignant." Miss Marple sipped her tea, the warmth spreading through her fingers. Indignant or defensive? She made a mental note to speak with Thomas later, perhaps when he was less guarded. For now, she steered the conversation to lighter topics, asking after Dolly's roses and the village fete, but her mind never strayed far from the mystery. The necklace, the lock, the staff. Mr. Lilich was a piece of a puzzle, and she was determined to fit them together. As the afternoon waned, Dolly's spirits lifted, buoyed by Miss Marple's calm presence. "Jane, you must come to our dinner party on Friday," she said suddenly. "It's just a small affair to take our minds off this wretched business. Sir Henry will be there, and the vicar, Ando. Mr. Lyle said he might stop by. You'll come, won't you?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "I wouldn't miss it, Dolly. It sounds like just the thing." The invitation was a stroke of luck, a chance to observe the household and its guests in a more intimate setting. She finished her tea, thanked Dolly warmly, and took her leave, promising to return for the dinner. Thomas showed her out, his face as unreadable as ever, but Miss Marple caught the briefest flicker of curiosity in his eyes as she passed. The walk back to St. Mary Mead was brisk, the air tinged with the chill of approaching evening. The village was settling into its twilight routine, children playing in the lanes, smoke curling from chimneys, the distant bark of a dog. Miss Marple's thoughts, however, were far from tranquil. The Bantry's burden was more than a stolen necklace. It was a web of secrets, woven through the household and beyond. Alfred's nervousness, Thomas's unease, Mr. Lyle's charm, and the faint scratches on the lock all pointed to a truth waiting to be uncovered. She paused at the tea shop, now quiet, its windows glowing softly. Inside, Mrs. Puddicombe was wiping down the counter, and Miss Marple decided to step in for a moment. "Good evening, Mrs. Puddicombe," she said, her voice cheerful. "I wonder if Alfred's about. I wanted to thank him for his help yesterday." Mrs. Puddicombe glanced up, her face creasing with concern. "Alfred's gone home early," Miss Marple said. "He wasn't feeling well. Poor lad's been jumpy all day, ever since the talk about the necklace started." Miss Marple nodded, her expression sympathetic, but her mind alert. "I see. Well, I'll catch him another time. Thank you, dear." She stepped back into the evening, her basket swinging at her side. Alfred's sudden illness was another clue, a sign of nerves stretched taut. She would need to speak with him soon, gently, to coax out whatever he knew. For now, she turned her thoughts to the dinner party. Mr. Lyle would be there, and perhaps others who had attended the gala. It was an opportunity to watch, to listen, to let the threads of the mystery draw tighter. As she reached her cottage, the roses in her garden glowed faintly in the dusk. Miss Marple unlocked her door, her mind already planning her next steps. The Bantry's burden had become her own, and she was determined to lift it. The dinner party loomed like a stage, where the players in this drama would reveal themselves, whether they knew it or not. She smiled, her needles clicking in her mind, stitching together the clues that would lead her to the truth. Chapter 3. Shadows of the Gala. The evening air carried a crisp edge as Miss Jane Marple made her way to Gossington Hall, her black shawl draped neatly over her shoulders and her knitting basket tucked under her arm. The invitation to the Bantries' dinner party had come at the perfect moment, offering her a chance to step into the heart of the mystery surrounding the stolen necklace. The village of St. Mary Mead was still buzzing with gossip about the theft, and Miss Marple's keen mind was already weaving together the threads she'd gathered. Alfred's nervous glance at the tea shop, Thomas's guarded demeanour, and the intriguing presence of Mr. Lyle, the art dealer whose name kept surfacing like a persistent melody. Gossington Hall glowed warmly against the twilight, its windows spilling light onto the manicured lawns. The dinner was to be a smaller affair than the gala, Dolly Bantry had assured her, but no less elegant. As Miss Marple approached, she noted the soft strains of a piano drifting from the house, mingling with the rustle of leaves in the evening breeze. The scene was idyllic, yet she sensed an undercurrent of tension, as if the hall itself were holding its breath. Thomas, the butler, greeted her at the door, his face as composed as ever, but his eyes betraying a flicker of strain. "Good evening, Miss Marple," he said, bowing slightly. "The guests are in the drawing-room. May I take your shawl?" "Thank you, Thomas," Miss Marple replied, her voice gentle but her gaze sharp. She handed over her shawl, noting the slight tremor in his hands as he took it. The weight of suspicion, she thought, could make even the steadiest hands falter. She followed him through the grand hall, her eyes scanning the familiar portraits and polished surfaces, searching for anything out of place. The drawing-room was a vision of understated opulence, with crystal chandeliers casting a soft glow over the gathered guests. Dolly Bantry, resplendent in a deep green gown, rushed forward to greet her. "Jane, you're here." "I'm so glad," she said, her voice a mix of relief and excitement. "Come, let me introduce you to everyone." The room held a small but lively crowd. Sir Henry Clithering, the retired Scotland Yard commissioner, whose sharp eyes missed little. The vicar, Mr. Clement, with his kind but distracted air. Miss Weatherby, whose sharp tongue was as notorious as her sharp nose. And, most notably, Mr. Lyle, the art dealer, whose tailored suit and easy smile marked him as an outsider in the village's cosy circle. A few others local gentry and a distant Bantry cousin filled out the group, their chatter bright but tinged with the unease of the recent theft. Miss Marple's eyes settled on Mr. Lyle, who was holding court near the fireplace, a glass of sherry in hand. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps in his late 30s, with dark hair swept back and a face that managed to be both boyish and worldly. He was regaling Sir Henry with a story about a rare emerald he'd once acquired in Paris, his voice smooth and confident. "The trick," he said, "is knowing the stone's history. Every jewel has a story, you see, and that story is its value." Sir Henry nodded, his expression polite but probing. "And what of the Bantry necklace? I hear it has quite a story itself." Mr. Lyle's smile didn't waver, but Miss Marple, watching from across the room, caught the briefest tightening of his jaw. "Oh, a magnificent piece," he said. "I was admiring it at the gala. Such a pity it's gone missing. I told Colonel Bantry it deserved a better lock than that old case." Miss Marple's needles, tucked into her basket, seemed to itch for movement. Mr. Lyle's casual mention of the lock was intriguing to specific. Perhaps, for a passing observation. She made a mental note to revisit the display case later. If possible, to examine those faint scratches she'd noticed during her last visit. Dolly drew her into conversation with Miss Weatherby, who was eager to share her theories about the theft. "Mark my words, Miss Marple," she said, her voice low but piercing. "It's that maid, Clara. She's new, you know, and I saw her lingering near the library during the gala. Shifty eyes, that one." Miss Marple smiled, her expression mild. "Clara, you say? I suppose anyone new would stand out in such a close-knit household. Did you notice anyone else near the library?" Miss Weatherby pursed her lips, thinking. Well, there was Thomas, of course, always fussing about. And that Lyle fellow, come to think of it, he was in and out of the library all evening, talking about art and jewels. I didn't trust him one bit. Before Miss Marple could probe further, dinner was announced, and the guests moved to the dining room, a grand space with a long mahogany table set with silver and crystal. Miss Marple found herself seated between Sir Henry and the vicar, with Mr. Lyle across the table, his eyes occasionally meeting hers with a charm that felt calculated. The meal was exquisite: pheasant, glazed vegetables, and a velvety red wine, but Miss Marple's attention was on the interactions around her. She noticed Clara, the maid, serving the soup with a quiet efficiency, her face pale and her movements precise. When Clara passed Mr. Lyle, he gave her a brief nod, almost imperceptible, and Miss Marple's interest sharpened. Was it a simple acknowledgement, or something more? She also observed Thomas, who stood at the head of the room, overseeing the service with a hawk-like gaze. At one point, she saw him slip a folded piece of paper to Clara, who tucked it into her apron pocket with a quick glance round. The gesture was subtle, but to Miss Marple it was as loud as a shout. She sipped her wine, her mind racing. A note, passed in plain sight, suggested confidence, or perhaps desperation. She resolved to keep an eye on Clara, whose youth and inexperience might make her a pawn in a larger game. As the meal progressed, Mr. Lyle turned his charm on the table, sharing stories of his travels and his dealings in rare artifacts. He spoke of a sapphire he'd once handled in Vienna, not unlike the Bantry necklace, he said, his eyes flickering toward Colonel Bantry, who sat at the head of the table, his face stern. Of course, Lyle added, such pieces are often targeted by thieves. It's why I always advise my clients to invest in modern security. Colonel Bantry grunted, his mustache twitching. Modern security be damned. That case has held our treasures for decades without issue. It's the people you have to watch, not the locks. Miss Marple noted the Colonel's defensiveness, a sign of his frustration and perhaps his guilt at failing to protect the family heirloom. She also caught Sir Henry's glance, a silent acknowledgement that they shared a suspicion about Lyle's motives. Sir Henry, she knew, was no fool. He'd spent years unravelling crimes, and his presence at the dinner was a stroke of fortune. After dinner, the guests returned to the drawing-room for coffee, and Miss Marple seized the opportunity to slip away. She murmured an excuse about needing fresh air and made her way to the garden, where the cool night air was a relief after the warmth of the dining room. The library windows overlooked the garden, and she positioned herself near a rosebush, her eyes on the house. The garden was quiet, save for the distant hum of voices from the drawing-room. Miss Marple's patience was rewarded when she saw a shadow move near the library window. It was Clara, stepping outside, her apron still tied around her waist. She glanced around, then reached into her pocket and pulled out the folded note. Before she could unfold it, A gust of wind caught it, sending it fluttering into the grass. Miss Marple held her breath, her heart quickening. Clara scrambled to retrieve the note, but it caught on a low hedge, tearing slightly. She grabbed it, stuffed it back into her pocket, and hurried back inside. Miss Marple waited a moment, then moved silently to the hedge. There, caught in the branches, was a tiny scrap of paper, no bigger than a postage stamp. She plucked it carefully, tucking it into her sleeve before returning to the house. Back in the drawing room, the guests were engrossed in a lively debate about local politics, and Miss Marple slipped into her seat unnoticed. She excused herself to the powder room, where, in the privacy of the small space, she examined the scrap. It bore a single word, sapphire. The handwriting was neat, almost clerkly, and Miss Marple's mind flashed to Thomas. Was he orchestrating something, or merely a messenger, and for whom? She returned to the drawing room, her face serene but her thoughts churning. Mr. Lyle was now speaking with Dolly, his gestures animated as he described a painting he'd seen in Florence. Miss Marple watched him closely, noting the way his eyes darted to the door whenever Thomas or Clara entered. There was a connection here, she was certain, but its shape was still elusive. As the evening drew to a close, Dolly pressed her to stay longer, but Miss Marple demurred, citing a need for rest. She thanked her hosts, her eyes lingering on Mr. Lyle as he bowed over her hand, his smile as polished as the silver in the dining room. "A pleasure, Miss Marple," he said. "I hope we'll meet again." "I'm sure we will," she replied, her tone light but her gaze steady. She stepped into the night, the scrap of paper still hidden in her sleeve, a tangible clue in a case that was growing more intricate by the hour. The walk back to St. Mary Mead was dark, the stars obscured by clouds, but Miss Marple's mind was alight with possibilities. The note, the glances, the stories, they were all threads in a tapestry, and she was beginning to see its pattern. Mr. Lyle's interest in the necklace, Thomas's secretive note, Clara's nervous compliance, it all pointed to a scheme that reached beyond the walls of Gossington Hall. The dinner had been a stage, and the players had revealed more than they knew as she reached her cottage. The roses in her garden swayed gently in the breeze. Miss Marple unlocked her door, her knitting basket heavy with the weight of her thoughts. She would examine the scrap of paper more closely, perhaps compare it to other handwriting in the village, and she would watch Mr. Lyle, whose charm was as much a mask as her own gentle demeanour. The shadows of the gala were lengthening, but Miss Marple was determined to bring them into the light. Chapter 4. Clara's secret the morning after the Bantrys' dinner party dawned soft and grey, with a fine mist cloaking St. Mary Mead in a veil of quiet mystery. Miss Jane Marple sat by her parlour window, her knitting needles clicking in a steady rhythm, the scrap of paper from the garden tucked safely in her pocket. The single word sapphire burned in her mind, a beacon in the fog of the stolen necklace case. The dinner had sharpened her suspicions. Mr. Lyle's calculated charm, Thomas's secretive note to Clara, and the maid's nervous haste in the garden all pointed to a conspiracy deeper than a simple theft. Today, Miss Marple resolved to unravel one thread of the puzzle. Clara, the young maid whose pale face and quick hands had caught her attention. The village was stirring as Miss Marple stepped out, her black shawl draped over her shoulders and her basket swinging lightly. The high street was a familiar tapestry of shops and cottages, their thatched roofs glistening with dew. She passed Mrs. Puddicombe's tea shop, where the windows were still dark, and nodded to Mr. Gibbs, the postmaster, who was unlocking his door. His bland smile was as unreadable as ever, But Miss Marple's mind flickered to the possibility of his involvement. A thought she tucked away for later. Her destination was Gossington Hall, but she took a circuitous route, pausing at the church to admire the rose window and gather her thoughts. Clara, she knew, was young, barely 20. According to Dolly Bantry, and new to the household, which made her an easy target for suspicion. Yet Miss Marple's experience had taught her that youth often meant vulnerability, not guilt. Clara's role in passing Thomas's notes suggested she was caught in someone else's web, and Miss Marple intended to approach her with the gentle persistence that had coaxed secrets from many a reluctant soul at Gossington. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and roses. Miss Marple rang the bell, and Thomas opened the door, his face as impassive as a stone carving. "Good morning, Miss Marple," he said, his voice smooth but his eyes wary. "Mrs. Bantry is in the garden room. Shall I fetch her?" "No need." "Thomas," Miss Marple replied, her smile disarming. "I was hoping to have a word with Clara, if she's not too busy. I have a small matter to discuss, some advice about mending lace, you see." Thomas hesitated, a flicker of surprise crossing his face before he nodded. "Of course, ma'am. Clara's in the kitchen. I'll send her to you." He led her to the garden room, a bright space with tall windows overlooking the rosebeds. Miss Marple settled into a wicker chair, her knitting basket at her feet, and waited. The room was quiet, save for the distant clatter of dishes from the kitchen, and she used the moment to reflect. The scrap of paper, with its single word, suggested a plan involving the necklace, but its purpose remained elusive. Was Clara a willing participant, or merely a messenger? And who was pulling the strings to Mr. Lyle, or someone yet unseen? Clara appeared moments later, her apron crisp but her face pale, her dark eyes darting nervously. She was a slight girl with mousy brown hair tucked under a cap, and her hands twisted together as she stood before Miss Marple. "You wanted to see me, ma'am?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, my dear," Miss Marple said, her tone warm and inviting. "Do sit down. I was hoping you might help me with a little problem. I've some old lace that's seen better days, and I hear you're clever with a needle." Clara hesitated, then perched on the edge of a chair, her hands still clasped tightly. "I'm not sure I'm that clever, ma'am, but I'd be happy to try." Miss Marple smiled, her needles clicking softly as she began to knit. "Nonsense. Clara, Dolly speaks highly of you, and I'm sure you're just the person I need. But tell me, how are you settling in at Gossington? It must be quite a change, coming to such a grand house." Clara's shoulders relaxed slightly, though her eyes remained guarded. "It's different, ma'am. Everyone's kind, but there's so much to learn. I'm still finding my way." "I imagine so," Miss Marple said, her voice soothing. "And with all this business about the necklace, it can't be easy. Such a dreadful thing, a theft in one's own home. You were at the gala, weren't you? It must have been quite a sight." Clara's fingers tightened in her lap, and Miss Marple noted the faint flush creeping up her neck. "Yes, ma'am. I was helping in the library, serving drinks and such. It was a grand night, until the necklace went missing." Miss Marple nodded, her needles never faltering. "It's hard to imagine someone slipping away with such a treasure, isn't it? I suppose you were busy all evening, running to and fro. Did you notice anything unusual, perhaps someone lingering near the display case?" Clara's eyes flicked to the door, then back to Miss Marple. I don't know, ma'am. There were so many people, and I was fetching trays from the kitchen. I didn't see much." Miss Marple's smile was gentle, but her mind was sharp. Clara's hesitation was telling, a sign of something held back. She decided to press a little further, but with care. Of course, my dear, it's easy to miss things in such a bustle. I saw you at the dinner last night, helping Thomas. You two seem to work well together. Clara's flush deepened, and she looked down at her hands. Thomas is very particular, ma'am. He likes things done just so. I try to keep up. I'm sure you do, Miss Marple said. I noticed him give you a note last night. Nothing important, I suppose, but it caught my eye. You seemed in a hurry to tuck it away. Clara's head jerked up, her eyes wide with alarm. For a moment, she seemed poised to bolt, but Miss Marple's calm gaze held her in place. It was just a reminder, ma'am, she stammered, about the silver for polishing. Thomas is always leaving me notes. Miss Marple nodded, her expression unchanged. Of course, my dear, a butler's work is never done, is it? But if there's anything troubling you, you know you can tell me. I've seen a great deal in my time, and I'm rather good at keeping confidences. Clara's lips trembled, and for a moment Miss Marple thought she might confess. But then the girl's face hardened, and she shook her head. There's nothing, ma'am, really. I should get back to the kitchen. Mrs. Bantry will be wanting her tea. Miss Marple let her go, her heart sinking slightly, but her resolve firm. Clara was hiding something, but fear was holding her tongue. It would take time to win her trust, and Miss Marple was nothing if not patient. As Clara hurried out, Miss Marple remained in the garden room, her needles clicking as she considered her next move. The note, or what remained of it, was a vital clue, but she needed more context. Thomas was the key, she was certain, but confronting him directly would only make him clam up. Instead, she decided to follow a different lead, one that had surfaced in the village gossip and her own observations. Mrs. Price, at the tea shop, had mentioned Thomas's late-night outings, supposedly to visit a sick aunt. The story had rung false to Miss Marple, who knew the village's web of connections as well as her own garden. Thomas's aunt, Mrs. Huggins, lived just beyond the church, and Miss Marple had seen her at the market only yesterday, hale and hearty. If Thomas was leaving Gossington at night, it wasn't to tend to family. She rose, smoothing her skirt, and made her way to the kitchen under the pretense of thanking the cook for last night's dinner. The kitchen was a hive of activity, with pots simmering and the scent of baking bread filling the air. Clara was at the sink, scrubbing a pan with fierce concentration, and Miss Marple caught her eye briefly before turning to the cook, Mrs. Eccles. A stout woman with a nonsense air. Mrs. Eccles. The pheasant last night was divine, Miss Marple said, her smile warm. I couldn't leave without saying so. Mrs. Eccles beamed, wiping her hands on her apron. Kind of you to say, Miss Marple. We do our best to keep the Bantrys happy. I'm sure you do, Miss Marple said. It must be a challenge, with all the comings and goings. I hear Thomas has been out late tending to his aunt. Such a dutiful nephew. Mrs. Eccles snorted, her eyes twinkling with amusement. Dutiful, is it? His aunt's fit as a fiddle, last I saw her. If Thomas is out at night, it's not to see Mrs. Huggins. More likely he's off to the Red Lion, drowning his sorrows over the police poking about. Miss Marple's heart quickened, but her face remained serene. The Red Lion, you say? Well, I suppose we all need a moment's respite. Thank you again, Mrs. Eccles. She left the kitchen, her mind buzzing. The Red Lion was a small pub on the edge of the village, a place where locals and strangers mingled over pints of ale. If Thomas was there, and not with his aunt, he might be meeting someone connected to the necklace. Miss Marple decided to follow this thread, but she would need to be discreet. A spinster wandering into a pub would raise eyebrows, so she enlisted the help of her nephew, Raymond West, who was visiting from London and always eager for a bit of adventure. Raymond arrived that afternoon, his car rattling into the village with a cheerful honk. He was a writer, prone to dramatic flourishes, but his sharp mind and loyalty made him an ideal ally. Over tea in Miss Marple's cottage, she outlined her plan. Raymond would visit the Red Lion that evening, posing as a curious tourist, and observe Thomas if he appeared. She gave him a description of the butler, tall, lean, with a perpetually stern expression, and instructed him to listen for any talk of jewels or strangers, and do be careful. Raymond, she said, her eyes twinkling, you're not to play the hero, just watch and listen. Raymond grinned, his eyes alight with mischief. Aunt Jane, you're wasted in this village. You'd have Scotland Yard eating out of your hand. Miss Marple waved off the compliment, but her smile was pleased. That evening, as the village settled into dusk, she sat by her fire, her knitting in her lap, and waited. Raymond returned. Just before midnight, his face flushed with excitement. You were right, Aunt Jane, he said, settling into a chair. Thomas was at the Red Lion, in a corner booth, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. He met a man rough sort, with a London accent and a scar over one eye. They kept their voices low, but I caught a few words. Buyer, delivery, and something about a drop. Sounded like they were planning something. Miss Marple's needles paused, her mind racing. A buyer, she murmured, and a drop. Did you see anything else, Raymond? A package, perhaps, or a note? Raymond shook his head. Nothing like that. But the man gave Thomas a hard look, like he was warning him. Thomas left in a hurry, and I followed him as far as the church before he slipped into the shadows. Miss Marple nodded, her thoughts coalescing. The stranger at the Red Lion was likely a fence, someone dealing in stolen goods. Thomas's involvement was becoming clearer, but Clara's role remained murky. Was she merely passing notes, or was she deeper in the scheme? And where did Mr. Lyle fit in? The next morning, Miss Marple returned to Gossington, this time with a basket of apples from her garden as an excuse. She found Clara in the laundry, ironing linens with a distracted air. Miss Marple set the basket down and began to chat. Her voice light, but her questions pointed. Clara, my dear, she said, I couldn't help but think of you after our chat yesterday. You seemed so worried. Is everything all right? Clara's hands stilled on the iron, her eyes darting to the door. I'm fine, ma'am, she said, but her voice trembled. Just busy is all. Miss Marple stepped closer, her tone soft but firm. If someone's troubling you, Clara, you can tell me. I've known girls in your position before, caught up in things they didn't mean to be. Those notes you're passing for Thomas Dew, they have anything to do with the necklace. Clara's face crumpled, and for a moment Miss Marple thought she might cry. But then the girl straightened, her voice barely audible. I don't know anything about the necklace, ma'am, honest. Thomas he asks me to pass notes sometimes, to people in the village. I don't read them. I swear I don't. Miss Marple placed a gentle hand on Clara's arm. I believe you, my dear, but if you're frightened, you must tell someone. I can help. You. Clara shook her head, her eyes filling with tears. I can't, ma'am. It's not just me. There's someone else who'd get hurt. Before Miss Marple could press further, footsteps echoed in the hall, and Clara turned back to her ironing, her face closed off. Miss Marple left the laundry, her heart heavy but her resolve stronger than ever. Clara was a pawn caught in a game she didn't fully understand. Thomas was the key, and the stranger at the Red Lion was a new piece in the puzzle. As she walked back to the village, the mist had lifted, revealing a sky of pale blue. Miss Marple's thoughts were as clear as the day. The necklace was still out there, hidden in the shadows of St. Mary Mead, and she was determined to find it. Clara's secret was a step closer to the truth, but the path was long, and the players in this drama were still moving. She would watch and wait and let the threads of the mystery draw tighter. Chapter 5. The art dealers charmed. The sun hung low over St. Mary Mead, casting long shadows across the village's cobbled lanes as Miss Jane Marple made her way to the Blue Boar Inn. Her knitting basket swung gently at her side, a familiar companion that masked the sharpness of her purpose. The events of the past few days had woven a complex tapestry in her mind. The stolen Bantry necklace, Clara's fearful confession, Thomas's clandestine meeting at the Red Lion, and the persistent presence of Mr. Lyle, the art dealer whose charm seemed to conceal as much as it revealed. Today, Miss Marple intended to unravel a thread of that tapestry by accepting Mr. Lyle's invitation to view his collection of antique Soulrian, invitation extended with a smile that was both gracious and calculated during the Bantry's dinner party. The Blue Boar was a modest establishment, its half-timbered facade and ivy-covered walls lending it a quaint charm that belied its role as a hub for travellers and gossip. Miss Marple stepped inside, greeted by the scent of polished wood and ale, and found Mr. Lyle waiting in the small parlour he'd reserved for their meeting. He rose as she entered, his dark hair swept back, his tailored suit impeccable. "Miss Marple, what a pleasure," he said, his voice warm as he extended a hand. "I'm delighted you could come." "Thank you, Mr. Lyle," Miss Marple replied, her smile gentle but her eyes alert. "I'm quite looking forward to seeing your collection. I've always had a fondness for old things, jewels, lace, stories. They all carry such history, don't they?" "Indeed they do," Lyle said, his eyes twinkling with what might have been amusement or caution. "Please, do sit. I've had tea brought in, and the pieces are laid out for you." The parlour was cosy, with a low ceiling and a fire crackling in the hearth. A table in the centre held a velvet-lined case, where a dozen or so pieces of jewellery gleamed under the soft light of a lamp. Miss Marple settled into a chair, her knitting basket at her feet, and let her gaze wander over the display. There were brooches, earrings, and rings, each with the patina of age and craftsmanship. But her attention was drawn to a sapphire ring, its deep blue stone winking like a star against the gold setting. It was strikingly similar to the description of the Bantry necklace's centrepiece, a large sapphire, surrounded by smaller diamonds. "What a lovely collection," Miss Marple said, her voice light as she leaned forward. "This ring, in particular, is exquisite. The stone reminds me of the Bantry necklace, the one so sadly stolen." Mr. Lyle's smile didn't falter, but Miss Marple caught the briefest flicker in his eyes, a shadow of calculation. "A fine eye you have, Miss Marple," he said, picking up the ring and turning it in the light. "Sapphires of this quality are rare but not unique. This piece is from an estate in Yorkshire, quite unrelated to the Bantry's treasure. A common design for its period, I'm afraid." Miss Marple nodded, her expression one of polite interest, but her mind was racing. The ring's design was too close to the necklace's description to be mere coincidence. She memorized its details: size of the stone, the cut of the diamonds, the intricate filigree of the band, knowing she would need to compare them to Darley Bantry's account later. "You must see so many treasures in your work," she said. "Tell me, how do you come by such pieces?" Lyle leaned back, his demeanor relaxed, but his words chosen with care. "Oh, the usual ways: auctions, private sales, sometimes a lucky find at a country estate. I have contacts across Europe, suppliers who know my taste for the exceptional. It's a matter of trust, really, building relationships with those who handle fine things." "Trust is so important," Miss Marple agreed, her needles clicking softly as she began to knit. "Especially in a village like ours, where everyone knows everyone else's business. I imagine it's different in London, with so many strangers coming and going." Lyle laughed, a sound as polished as his appearance. "London's a whirlwind, Miss Marple. You learn to read people quickly, to spot the genuine from the fake. But I find villages like St. Mary Mead charming, everyone so open, so eager to share their stories." Miss Marple's smile was serene, but her thoughts were sharp. Lyle's ease was a performance, she was certain, designed to deflect scrutiny. His interest in the Bantry necklace, his presence at the gala, and now the suspiciously familiar ring, all pointed to a role in the theft, though whether as mastermind or accomplice remained unclear. She decided to test him further, her voice as gentle as a summer breeze. "I suppose you've heard all the gossip about the necklace," she said. "The village is quite convinced it was an inside job. Poor Dolly is beside herself, suspecting her own staff. I wonder, did you notice anything odd at the gala? You were in the library, I hear, admiring the necklace." Lyle's fingers paused on the ring, a movement so subtle it might have gone unnoticed by anyone less observant. "I did admire it," he said, his tone casual. "A stunning piece, poorly secured, if I may say so. I mentioned to Colonel Bantry that a modern safe would be wiser, but he's fond of tradition. As for anything odd, I'm afraid I was too caught up in the evening's charm to notice much. The Bantrys are excellent hosts." Miss Marple nodded, her needles never faltering. His answer was smooth, but it lacked the ring of truth. She thought of Clara's fear, Thomas's late-night meeting, and the scrap of paper with its single word: sapphire. Lyle's role was becoming clearer, but she needed more to pin him down. "You must have a keen eye for security in your line of work," she said. "Have you ever dealt with stolen goods, Mr. Lyle? I imagine it's a risk." "In your trade?" For the first time, Lyle's smile faltered, a crack in his polished facade. "Stolen goods," he said, his voice light but edged with steel. "I'm careful about my sources, Miss Marple. My reputation depends on it. But I won't deny the trade has its darker corners. You hear stories, jewels slipping through the cracks, buyers who don't ask questions. I steer clear of that sort." "Of course," Miss Marple said, her tone soothing. "I didn't mean to suggest otherwise. It's just that this theft has set the village on edge. Everyone's looking for answers." Lyle relaxed, his smile returning. "Understandable. I hope the police find the culprit soon. It's a shame to see such a fine piece lost." Miss Marple sipped her tea, her mind cataloguing every word, every gesture. Lyle was clever, but not clever enough to hide the tension in his posture when she'd mentioned stolen goods. She decided to shift tactics, steering the conversation to lighter topics: his travels, his favorite artists, while her eyes roamed the room. On a side table, she noticed a ledger, its leather cover worn but its pages crisp. It was open to a list of transactions, with names and figures in a neat hand. She couldn't read it from her seat, but its presence was another clue, a glimpse into Lyle's world. As the visit drew to a close, Lyle offered to show her more of his collection, but Miss Marple demurred, citing a need to return home before dark. "You've been most kind, Mr. Lyle," she said, rising. "I shall tell Dolly how fascinating your collection is. Perhaps she'll invite you to show it at Gossington." Lyle's eyes gleamed, whether with pleasure or calculation, she couldn't be sure. "I'd be honored," he said, escorting her to the door. "Do come again, Miss Marple. I enjoy your company." She smiled, her expression as innocent as a lamb, but her mind was a steel trap. As she stepped into the fading light, the sapphire ring burned in her memory, a beacon pointing to Lyle's involvement. She would need to confirm its provenance, perhaps through Sir Henry Clithering, who had contacts in London's art world. But first, she needed to explore another letter Lyle's suppliers, the shadowy figures who provided his exceptional pieces. Back in her cottage, Miss Marple sat by the fire, her knitting in her lap and the scrap of paper on the table before her. The word sapphire seemed to glow in the firelight, a link between Clara, Thomas, and now Lyle. She thought of the ledger in Lyle's parlour, its neat rows of transactions. If she could see it, she might find a name, a date, a clue to the necklace's fate. But that would require another visit, and she would need to tread carefully. Lyle was no fool, and her questions had already stirred his suspicion. The next day, she visited Mrs. Price at the butcher's shop, knowing the woman's knack for gossip rivaled her own for observation. Over a chat about lamb chops, Miss Marple steered the conversation. "To Lyle, I met that art dealer, Mr. Lyle, yesterday," she said, her tone casual. "Such a charming man. I hear he's been about the village, buying papers and such. Do you know where he gets his lovely jewels?" Mrs. Price's eyes lit up, eager to share. "Oh, he's a sly one, that Lyle. My Bert saw him at the post office, sending parcels to London. Big ones, too wrapped tight. And he's been seen with that rough fellow, Carver, who comes through now and then. They say Carver's a dealer in all sorts, if you catch my meaning." Miss Marple's heart quickened, but her face remained serene. "Carver, you say? I don't believe I know him." "Not the sort you'd meet, Miss Marple," Mrs. Price said, lowering her voice. "He's got a scar over one eye, looks like trouble. Bert says he's been at the Red Lion, same as Thomas. Makes you wonder, doesn't it?" "Indeed it does," Miss Marple said, her smile polite but her mind racing. Carver, the man Raymond had seen with Thomas at the Red Lion. The pieces were falling into place, a pattern of connections linking Lyle, Thomas, and now this Carver. She thanked Mrs. Price, purchased a small cut of meat she didn't need, and returned home, her thoughts buzzing. That evening, she wrote to Sir Henry Clithering, asking if he could discreetly inquire about Lyle's reputation in London's art circles. She mentioned the sapphire ring, describing its details with precision, and asked if he knew of a dealer named Carver. Sir Henry's reply, she knew, would take a day or two, but it would be worth the wait as the fire crackled in her parlour. Miss Marple's needles clicked, stitching together the clues. Lyle's charm was a mask, hiding a man who dealt in more than art. The sapphire ring was a clue, perhaps a piece of the necklace itself, dismantled to avoid detection. Clara's fear, Thomas's secrecy and Carver's presence all pointed to. A scheme that stretched beyond St. Mary Mead. Miss Marple leaned back, her eyes on the flames, and smiled. The art dealer's charm had met its match, and she was determined to see the game through. Chapter 6. The village gossip. The morning mist hung low over St. Mary Mead, draping the village in a soft, silvery shroud that muffled the clatter of milk cans and the chatter of early risers. Miss Jane Marple sat at her breakfast table, her knitting basket at her elbow, a cup of tea steaming gently before her. The sapphire ring she had seen in Mr. Lyle's collection at the Blue Boar Inn lingered in her mind, its deep blue stone a mirror to the missing Bantry necklace. Her visit to Lyle had confirmed her suspicions. His charm was a polished veneer, concealing a man who dealt in shadows. But the web of the theft was growing more intricate, with threads connecting Clara's fear, Thomas's secretive notes, and now a mysterious figure named Carver, glimpsed in the Red Lion with the butler. Today, Miss Marple intended to weave those threads tighter, and there was no better place to start than the heart of the villagers' gossip, Mrs. Price's butcher shop. She donned her tweed coat and black shawl, tucking her knitting into her basket, and stepped into the cool morning air. The high street was coming to life, with shopkeepers sweeping their steps and children scampering toward the schoolhouse. Miss Marple's steps were measured but purposeful as she made her way to the butcher's, where Mrs. Price held court with the authority of a village oracle. The shop's bell jingled as she entered, and the scent of fresh meat and sawdust greeted her, mingling with the hum of conversation. Mrs. Price stood behind the counter, her apron pristine despite the morning's work, her eyes lighting up at the sight of Miss Marple. "Why, Miss Marple, what a treat!" she exclaimed, wiping her hands on a cloth. "Come for a bit of lamb, have you? Or is it news you're after?" Miss Marple smiled, her blue eyes twinkling with the innocence that so often disarmed her quarry. "A bit of both, perhaps," she said, her voice gentle. "I've been thinking about that dreadful business at Gossington Hall. The village is quite abuzz, and I thought you might have heard something new." Mrs. Price leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, though the shop was empty save for a young assistant trimming chops in the back. "Oh, it's all anyone can talk about, Miss Marple. That necklace, sapphire and diamonds, worth a fortune. They're saying it's in London by now, sold off to some shady dealer. My Bert heard it from the milkman, who got it from old Tuttle. At the hall, everyone's pointing fingers at the staff, but I've my own thoughts." Miss Marple's needles clicked softly as she pulled them from her basket, settling onto a stool by the counter. "Do you, now?" "I'm all ears, Mrs. Price. You've such a knack for getting to the heart of things." Flattered, Mrs. Price puffed up slightly, her eyes gleaming with the thrill of sharing. "Well, you know that art dealer, Mr. Lyle. He's been seen about the village, acting like he owns the place. Bert saw him at the post office, sending off parcels, big ones, mind you, wrapped tight as a drum. And then there's that Carver fellow, the one with the scar over his eye. He's no stranger to St. Mary Mead, though he keeps to the shadows. Bert says he's a fence, deals in stolen goods up in London. He was at the Red Lion last night, same as Thomas, the Bantry's butler. Makes you wonder what they're cooking up." Miss Marple's heart quickened, but her face remained serene, her needles moving in a steady rhythm. Carver, the man Raymond had described, meeting Thomas in a dimly lit booth. The connection was no surprise, but Mrs. Price's mention of him as a known fence was a vital clue, tying the villagers' whispers to the broader world of illicit trade. Carver, you say? She mused, her tone light. I don't believe I've met him. Is he often in the village? Not often, thank goodness, Mrs. Price said, slicing a cut of beef with practiced ease. He comes and goes, usually at night. Bert says he's got a look about him, like he's always watching his back. Last time he was here, a silver candlestick went missing from the vicarage. Never proved it was him, mind, but you don't need proof to know a fox when you see one. Miss Marple nodded, filing the information away. A fence in London, a stolen candlestick, a meeting with Thomas It was a pattern clear as the stitches in her knitting, but there was another detail nagging at her, something Clara had let slip in her fear. Thomas's supposed visits to a sick aunt. I heard Thomas has been out late, tending to his aunt, she said casually. Mrs. Huggins, isn't it? Such a devoted nephew. Mrs. Price snorted, her knife pausing mid-cut. Devoted, my foot. Mrs. Huggins was at the market yesterday, fit as a fiddle, buying turnips and chattering away. If Thomas is out at night, it's not to see her. More likely he's meeting that Carver at the Red Lion, or worse. My Bert says Thomas has been jumpy ever since the gala, like he's got something to hide. Miss Marple's needles paused, her mind seizing on the confirmation. Mrs. Huggins's health was no surprise. She'd seen the woman herself, bustling about with her usual vigour, but Mrs. Price's words solidified her suspicion. Thomas's late-night outings were a cover, likely for meetings with Carver, and possibly linked to the necklace's disappearance. She leaned forward slightly, her voice soft but probing. How curious. Do you think Thomas might know this Carver fellow? It's such a small village, after all. Mrs. Price's eyes narrowed, her gossip-honed instincts sensing a deeper question. Know him. I'd wager they're thick as thieves, pardon the pun. Bert saw them together last week, heads bent low over a table at the Red Lion, and theirs. Talk of a stranger in the village, the night of the gala, someone who didn't belong. Could have been Carver, slipping in to case the place. Miss Marple's heart gave a little leap, but she kept her expression one of mild curiosity. A stranger. At the gala, that's interesting. Did Bert get a look at him? Not close, Mrs. Price admitted, wrapping a cut of meat in paper. But he was at the edge of the estate, near the stables, when the guests were leaving. Tall, rough-looking, with a cap pulled low. Didn't stay long, just watched, then vanished. Bert thought it odd, but with all the fuss about the necklace, he forgot to mention it till now. Miss Marple nodded, her mind racing. A stranger at the gala, possibly Carver, watching from the shadows. It suggested a planned theft, with Thomas as an inside man and Carver as the link to the outside world. But where did Mr. Lyle fit in? His sapphire ring, so like the Bantry necklace, hinted at a role beyond mere bystander. She thanked Mrs. Price, purchased a small joint she didn't need, and stepped back into the misty morning, her thoughts as tangled as the wool in her basket. Her next stop was the post office, where Mr. Gibbs was sorting letters behind the counter. His bland smile greeted her, but Miss Marple's sharp eyes noted the slight tension in his shoulders, as if he sensed her purpose. Good morning, Mr. Gibbs, she said, pulling a letter from her basket. I've a note for my nephew in London, and I thought I might ask after that art dealer, Mr. Lyle. I hear he's been sending parcels from here. Mr. Gibbs's hands paused on the letters, his smile unwavering but his eyes cautious. Mr. Lyle, yes, he's been in a few times. Sends parcels to London, mostly. Art business, I suppose. Keeps to himself, mostly. Miss Marple nodded, her tone light. I saw his collection yesterday's, such lovely pieces. I imagine he sends them to buyers in the city. Have you noticed anyone else with him? A man named Carver, perhaps? The name elicited a reaction, subtle, but unmistakably a slight tightening of Mr. Gibbs's jaw, a flicker of recognition in his eyes. Carver, he said, his voice even. Can't say I know the name. We get all sorts through here, Miss Marple. Hard to keep track. Of course, she said, her smile disarming. You must see everyone's comings and goings, I suppose. Thomas, from Gossington, is a regular too, with all his errands for the Bantries. Mr. Gibbs's hands resumed sorting, but his movements were stiffer now. Thomas, RJS. In often enough. Letters, parcels, the usual. Steady sort. Thomas. Miss Marple paid for her stamp, her mind cataloguing Mr. Gibbs's reaction. He knew more than he was letting on, but pressing him now would only make him clam up. She thanked him and left, her thoughts turning to Thomas's supposed aunt. A visit to Mrs. Huggins was in order, to confirm what she already suspected. Mrs. Huggins lived in a tidy cottage near the church, its garden bursting with late-blooming roses. Miss Marple found her pruning a bush, her face ruddy and her hands strong. "Good morning, Mrs. Huggins," Miss Marple called, her basket swinging. "Your roses are a sight to behold." Mrs. Huggins straightened, her smile broad. "Miss Marple, come to steal my secrets, have you? These roses are my pride and joy." They chatted about gardening for a moment, but Miss Marple soon steered the conversation to Thomas. "I hear your nephew's been such a help to you," she said. "Visiting at all hours, despite his duties at Gossington. You must be so grateful." Mrs. Huggins's brow furrowed, her pruning shears pausing. "Thomas visiting me? Not lately, Miss Marple. He's been busy at the Hall, what with that theft and all. Haven't seen him in weeks, except at church." Miss Marple's heart gave a satisfied nod, though her face remained sympathetic. "How odd, I must have misheard. The village is full of talk, you know, with the necklace gone." Mrs. Huggins snorted, her eyes flashing. "Talk, is it? They're all pointing fingers, but I'll tell you, Thomas wouldn't steal a pin. He's loyal to the Bantries, always has been. If he's out at night, it's not for mischief." Miss Marple nodded, her mind racing. Mrs. Huggins's defense of Thomas was heartfelt, but it only deepened the mystery. If Thomas wasn't visiting his aunt, his late-night outings were a lie, likely tied to Carver and the necklace. She thanked Mrs. Huggins, admired her roses once more, and returned to her cottage, her thoughts buzzing like bees. That evening, she sat by her fire, her knitting in her lap, and pieced together the day's clues. Mrs. Price's gossip had confirmed Carver as a fence, a man with a history of dealing in stolen goods. Mrs. Huggins's words had exposed Thomas's lie, suggesting his meetings with Carver were part of a larger scheme, and Mr. Gibbs's reaction hinted at his own knowledge, perhaps as a bystander or something more. The sapphire ring in Lyle's collection was the linchpin, a tangible link to the necklace, but she needed more to connect it to Carver and Thomas. She decided to enlist Raymond again, asking him to keep an eye on the Red Lion for any sign of Carver or Thomas. She also wrote to Sir Henry Clithering, requesting more details on Carver's reputation in London. As she sealed the letter, her needles clicked, stitching together the threads of the mystery. The village gossip had given her a map, and she was determined to follow it to the truth. Chapter 7. Thomas's tale. The morning mist hung low over St. Mary Mead. wrapping the village in a soft, silvery veil that seemed to mirror the elusive nature of the mystery surrounding the stolen Bantry necklace. Miss Jane Marple sat at her breakfast table, her knitting needles idle for once. As her sharp mind turned over the clues she had gathered, the sapphire ring in Mr. Lyle's collection, Clara's fearful admission about passing notes, and the village gossip tying Thomas, the Bantry's butler, to a shadowy fence named Carver, Mrs. Huggins's confirmation that Thomas had not been visiting her, despite his claims of tending to a sick aunt, had solidified Miss Marple's suspicion that the butler was entangled in the theft. Today she resolved to confront Thomas, not with accusation, but with the gentle persistence that had unravelled many a secret in her time. Miss Marple donned her tweed coat and black shawl, tucking her knitting into her basket, and stepped into the cool morning air. The high street was stirring, with shopkeepers sweeping their steps and the milkman's cart rattling by. Her first stop was the village church, a hunch prompting her to investigate Clara's mention of Thomas leaving notes, in a pure detail that had lingered like a loose thread in her mind. The churchyard was quiet, the ancient stones glowing faintly in the mist, and she slipped inside, the scent of old wood and candle wax enveloping her. The pews stood in orderly rows, their polished surfaces gleaming dully in the dim light. Miss Marple moved to the back, where shadows offered cover for secrets. In the third pew from the rear, her fingers brushed a folded piece of paper tucked beneath a hymn. Her heart quickened as she recognized the neat, clerkly handwriting from the scrap she'd found in the Bantry's garden, bearing the word sapphire. This note was longer, a series of numbers and letters that appeared cryptic but hinted. At a code, she slipped it into her pocket, her mind already teasing at its meaning, and set off for Gossington Hall. The Manor's gravel drive crunched under her sensible shoes, and Clara answered the bell, her pale face and nervous glance betraying her unease. "Good morning, Miss Marple," she said softly. "Mrs. Bantry's in the morning room. Shall I fetch her?" "No, thank you, Clara," Miss Marple replied, her smile warm but her eyes searching. "I'd like a word with Thomas, if he's free. A small matter about the dinner party." Clara's hands twisted in her apron, but she nodded. "He's in the pantry, ma'am. I'll let him know." Miss Marple followed her to the pantry, a small room off the kitchen where Thomas was polishing silver with meticulous care. His tall frame was bent over the table, his face a mask of focus, but a slight tension in his shoulders betrayed his awareness of her presence. "Miss Marple, to see you, Thomas," Clara said, then hurried away, her footsteps fading down the hall. Thomas straightened, his expression impassive. "Good morning, Miss Marple," he said, his voice smooth but guarded. "How may I assist?" "You." Miss Marple settled onto a stool, her knitting basket at her feet, and pulled out her needles, their rhythmic clicking a soothing counterpoint to the charged air. "Good morning, Thomas," she said, her tone gentle. The dinner party was splendid, despite the shadow of the necklace's theft. "You must have been run off your feet, managing everything." Thomas's hands paused on a silver candlestick, his eyes flicking to hers. "It was a busy evening, ma'am. The Bantrys expect precision." "Of course," Miss Marple said, her needles moving steadily, "and with all this talk of the necklace, it must be trying. I hear you've been out late, visiting your aunt, Mrs. Huggins. So dutiful, though I saw her yesterday, and she seemed quite well." The candlestick slipped, clattering faintly against the table. Thomas recovered quickly, but Miss Marple noted the flush creeping up his neck. "My aunt has her good days, ma'am," he said, his voice tight. I check on her when I can." Miss Marple's smile was soft, but her gaze was sharp. "How curious. The village is small, and tongues wag. They say you've been seen at the Red Lion, meeting a man named Carver, a rough sort, with a scar over one eye. It's odd, isn't it, with the necklace missing?" Thomas's face hardened, his hands stilling. Silence settled, broken only by the click of her needles. Then he spoke, his voice low and strained. "I don't know what you've heard, Miss Marple, but my business is my own." "Naturally," she said, her tone soothing. "But a theft like this sets everyone on edge. You're loyal to the Bantrys, Thomas, but if you're in trouble, it's better to speak now. I've seen fear trap good men, and I'd hate for you to be caught in something unintended." His eyes met hers, and for a moment, desperation flickered. In his gaze, he leaned against the table, his shoulders sagging. "You don't understand, ma'am," he said, his voice barely audible. "It's not what you think. I took the necklace, yes, but not for myself. I was forced, Miss Marple." Needles paused, her heart quickening but her face serene. "Forced, Thomas, by whom?" He glanced at the door, as if expecting an eavesdropper, then spoke, his words spilling out. "Carver, he's got something on me, a mistake from years ago, when I was young and foolish. He threatened to ruin me, tell the Bantrys, send me to prison. He wanted the necklace for a buyer. I had no choice, ma'am. I took it during the gala, when the guests were distracted, and passed it to him the next night at the Red Lion." Miss Marple's mind raced, piecing together his confession. "And the notes you've given Clara?" she asked gently. "Were they for Carver?" Thomas nodded, his face pale. "Instructions from him. He told me to leave them in the church. Pew, coded so no one would understand. I don't know who the buyer is, only that Carver's desperate to please them. Clara just passed the notes. She doesn't know what they mean." Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the note in her pocket. "It's cipher, a puzzle waiting to be solved. You've been under a heavy burden, Thomas," she said. "But telling the truth is the first step to lifting it. Where is the necklace now?" "I don't know," he said, his voice hoarse. "Carver took it. Said it was going to London. That's all I know, ma'am, I swear." She nodded, her expression sympathetic but her mind alert. Thomas's confession was a breakthrough, but the necklace's trail led beyond St. Mary Mead. "Thank you, Thomas," she said. "You've done the right thing. I'll keep your confidence for now, but you must be ready to tell the police when the time comes." He nodded, his eyes haunted but relieved. Miss Marple left the pantry, her basket swinging, and made her way to the church to retrieve the note she'd found earlier. Back in her cottage, she spread the paper on her table. Its cryptic sequence 3, B127A5, 9C, 8 staring back at her. She recognized it as a substitution cipher, each pair corresponding to a letter in a prearranged text. After some thought, she tested it against a Book of Common Prayer, a likely choice for a church-based drop, using the first line of a familiar psalm. She decoded the message. "Meet mill midnight." Her pulse quickened. The old mill, a crumbling relic on the village's outskirts, was a perfect spot for a clandestine meeting. Thomas's tale had given her the key, and the note pointed to the next step. She resolved to stake out the mill that night, enlisting her nephew Raymond for assistance. The mystery was unfolding, and Miss Marple was determined to follow its threads to the end. Chapter 8. Midnight at the mill. The moon hung low over St. Mary Mead, its pale light barely piercing the heavy clouds that cloaked the village in darkness. Miss Jane Marple stood at the edge of her garden, her black shawl wrapped tightly against the chill her knitting basket left behind for once. The decoded note from the church pew, "Meat Mill Midnight," burned in her mind. A beacon in the tangled web of the Bantry necklace theft. Thomas's confession had confirmed his role as a coerced accomplice, passing the stolen sapphire to a fence named Carver, but the note suggested the scheme was far from over. Tonight, Miss Marple intended to stake out the old mill, a crumbling relic on the village's outskirts, to catch a glimpse of the players in this shadowy drama. Her nephew, Raymond West, was at her side, his usual flair for theatrics tempered by the gravity of the task. "Aunt Jane, you're sure about this?" Raymond whispered, his breath visible in the cold air. "The mill's no place for a midnight stroll. It's half falling down, and if this Carver chap is as rough as you say—" "I'm quite sure, Raymond," Miss Marple replied, her voice calm but firm. "We'll keep our distance and stay hidden. You're not to play the hero, mind. We're here to observe, nothing more." Raymond grinned, though his eyes were wary. "You're the general, Aunt Jane. Lead on." They set off along a narrow path that wound through the fields, the villagers' lights fading behind them. The old mill stood a mile beyond St. Mary Mead, its silhouette a jagged outline against the sky. Once a bustling hub for grinding grain, it was now a forgotten ruin, its wheels stilled and its stones moss-covered. Miss Marple had chosen a spot for their vigil, cluster of willows near the river bank, offering cover and a clear view of the mill's entrance. She carried a small torch, its beam kept low, and Raymond had a pair of binoculars, a relic from his bird-watching days, as they settled behind the willows. The night was silent, save for the soft gurgle of the river and the occasional hoot of an owl. Miss Marple's mind was alert, piecing together the clues. Thomas's admission that he'd handed the necklace to Carver, Clara's role as an unwitting messenger, and Mr. Lyle's suspicious sapphire ring, so like the Bantry heirloom. The note's instruction to meet at the mill suggested a handoff or a meeting to plan the necklace's next move. But who would upper Carver, Lyle, or someone new? The church clock struck midnight, its distant chime carrying faintly on the wind. Miss Marple's eyes were fixed on the mill, its broken windows like dark eyes staring back. A shadow moved near the entrance, and Raymond tensed beside her, his binoculars raised. "Someone's there," he whispered. Passing the binoculars to her, she peered through them, her breath steady despite the quickening of her pulse. A figure emerged from the mill's doorway, tall and lean, with a cap pulled low. The scar over his eye was unmistakable, even in the dim light. Carver. He carried a small package, wrapped tightly, and glanced around, his movements wary. Miss Marple's heart leaped. The package could be the necklace, or perhaps a decoy, but its presence confirmed the mill as a key point in the scheme. Another figure approached, stepping from the shadows of the mill's crumbling wall. Miss Marple adjusted the binoculars, her lips parting in surprise. It was Mr. Lyle, his tailored coat and easy stride unmistakable, though his usual charm was replaced by a tense alertness. He greeted Carver with a curt nod, his voice low but carrying in the still night. "You're late," he said. "Is it here?" Carver's voice was gruff, edged with irritation. "It's here, but the buyer's getting impatient. Wants it by tomorrow, no excuses. You'd better have the money." Lyle's tone was smooth, but Miss Marple caught a hint of strain. "The money's ready, but I need to see it first." "No tricks, Carver." Carver handed over the package, and Lyle unwrapped it, revealing a glint of blue in the moonlight as sapphire. unmistakably large, set in a nest of diamonds. Miss Marple's breath caught. The Bantry necklace, or a piece of it, was right there, its fate hanging in the balance. She leaned closer to Raymond, whispering, "It's the necklace. We mustn't lose sight of them." Before she could say more, a third figure emerged from the mill, moving with a stealth that sent a chill down her spine. The figure was shorter, stockier, with a familiar stoop that made Miss Marple's eyes widen. It was Mr. Gibbs, the village postmaster, his bland smile replaced by a hard expression. He stepped into the moonlight, his voice sharp. "What's the hold-up? We're exposed here." Carver and Lyle spun to face him, their tension palpable. "Gibbs," Carver growled, "you were supposed to stay out of sight." "I'm not sitting in that damp ruin all night," Gibbs snapped. "The buyer's breathing down my neck, and I want this done." Miss Marple's mind raced, the pieces falling into place. Mr. Gibbs, the unassuming postmaster, was no bystander he was part of. The scheme, possibly its orchestrator. His presence at the mill explained his guarded reaction when she'd mentioned Carver at the post office. Raymond's eyes met hers, wide with shock, but she pressed a finger to her lips, urging silence. They were too close to risk discovery. Lyle handed the package back to Carver, his voice low. "We'll meet the buyer tomorrow, in London. You take it, Carver. Gibbs, you handle the payment. No mistakes." Gibbs nodded, but his eyes darted to the shadows, as if sensing eyes upon them. Miss Marple held her breath, her body still behind the willows. The three men exchanged a few more words, too low to catch, then scattered. Carver toward the village, Lyle toward the road, and Gibbs back into the mill. Miss Marple waited until their footsteps faded, then turned to Raymond. "We must get back," she whispered. "This changes everything." They retraced their steps through the fields, the night air cold against their faces. Back in her cottage, Miss Marple lit a lamp and sat at her table, her mind buzzing. Gibbs's involvement was a revelation, suggesting a deeper network than she'd imagined. The necklace was still in play, destined for a buyer in London, and the mill was a hub for their plans. She needed to act quickly before the trail vanished into the city's sprawl. She turned to Raymond, who was pacing her parlor, his excitement barely contained. "Aunt Jane, that was Gibbs, the postmaster, of all people. What's he doing mixed up with the likes of Carver?" "Mr. Gibbs sees everything, Raymond," she said, her voice calm but her eyes sharp. "Letters, parcels, secrets, he's in the perfect position to coordinate such a scheme. I suspect he's more than a middleman. We must watch him closely, but discreetly." She pulled the coded note from her pocket. Its message, "Meet Mill, midnight," now fulfilled. The cipher had led her to this moment, but the necklace's fate was still uncertain. She resolved to share her findings with Sir Henry Clithering, whose connections at Scotland Yard could help track the necklace to London. But first, she needed to confirm Gibbs's role and ensure Thomas and Clara were protected from the fallout. The next morning, she visited the post office, her pretext a letter to post for her nephew. Mr. Gibbs greeted her with his usual bland smile, but Miss Marple noted a new wariness in his eyes. "Good morning, Miss Marple," he said, sorting letters with practiced ease. "Another letter for London." "Yes, Mr. Gibbs," she replied, her tone light. "You must be busy with all the comings and goings in the village. I hear there's been quite a stir at the Red Lion lately." His hands paused, a flicker of tension crossing his face. "The Red Lion, just the usual crowd, ma'am, nothing out of the ordinary." Miss Marple smiled, her needles clicking in. Her basket, of course. It's just that the village is so full of talk, with the necklace still missing. You'd know if anything suspicious passed through, wouldn't you? Gibbs's smile tightened, but he nodded. I keep my eyes open, Miss Marple. Nothing gets past me. She left the post office, her heart quickening. Gibbs's involvement was clear, and his caution suggested he knew the net was tightening. The stakeout had given her a glimpse into the heart of the conspiracy, and she was determined to follow it to its end. The necklace was within reach, and Miss Marple's quiet resolve would light the way. Chapter 9. The postmaster's ploither. Dawn broke over St. Mary Mead with a soft, golden light, filtering through the mist that clung to the village's thatched roofs and cobblestone lanes. Miss Jane Marple sat by her parlour window, her knitting needles idle for the moment, as she sipped her morning tea and reflected on the previous night's revelations at the old mill. The sight of Mr. Gibbs, the village postmaster, emerging from the shadows to join Carver and Mr. Lyle had shifted the puzzle of the Bantry necklace theft into sharper focus. Gibbs, with his bland smile and unassuming demeanour, was no mere bystander. He was a key player, possibly the linchpin, in a scheme that stretched beyond the village's quiet borders. The coded note, "Meat Mill Midnight," had led her to this discovery, and now she needed to uncover the extent of Gibbs's involvement. Today, she resolved to visit the post office under the guise of a mundane errand. To probe the postmaster's secrets, Miss Marple donned her tweed coat and black shawl, tucking her knitting into her basket, and stepped into the crisp morning air. The high street was stirring, with the milkman's cart rattling by and Mrs. Puddicombe sweeping the step of her tea shop. Miss Marple's steps were measured, her mind a whirl of threads. Thomas's confession that he'd been blackmailed by Carver into stealing the necklace, Clara's role as an unwitting messenger, Lyle's suspicious sapphire ring, and now Gibbs's unexpected appearance at the mill. The postmaster's position gave him access to the village's communications letters, parcels, secret sand, made him ideally placed to orchestrate a theft. But what was his motive, and how deep did his involvement run? The post office was a small, tidy building with a red door and a brass bell that jingled as Miss Marple entered. Mr. Gibbs stood behind the counter, sorting letters with the efficiency of long habit, his face as bland as ever. "Good morning, Miss Marple," he said, his smile polite but his eyes wary. "Here to post another letter for your nephew." "Good morning, Mr. Gibbs," she replied, her voice warm as she pulled a sealed envelope from her basket. "Just a note to Raymond, thank you. You must be busy with all the mail coming and going. I imagine you see everything that passes through the village." Gibbs's hands paused briefly, a flicker of tension crossing his face before his smile returned. "Oh, aye, it's a busy job, ma'am. Letters, parcels, telegrams keeps me on my toes." Miss Marple nodded, her needles clicking softly as she began to knit, settling onto a stool near the counter. "I'm sure it does. And with all this talk about the Bantry necklace, it must be a strain. The village is full of gossip. Some say the thief's long gone, others that the necklace is still close by. You'd know if anything unusual passed through, wouldn't you?" Gibbs's smile tightened, his fingers resuming their sorting with a touch more force. "I keep my eyes open, Miss Marple, but nothing out of the ordinary's come through. Just the usual bills and birthday cards." "Of course," she said, her tone disarming. "Though I hear Mr. Lyle, the art dealer, has been sending parcels to London. And there's talk of that Carver fellow, the one with the scar." I suppose you'd notice if they were posting anything suspicious. Gibbs's eyes flicked to hers, a shadow of unease passing over his face. Mr. Lyle sends his parcels, yes? Art business, he says. As for Carver, I don't know the man. We get all sorts through here, ma'am. Miss Marple's smile was serene, but her mind was sharp. Gibbs's reaction to Carver's name was telling her, subtle, stiffening, a glance toward the door. She decided to press a little further, her voice as gentle as a summer breeze. I'm sure you do. And Thomas, from Gossington Hall, he's a regular, isn't he? Always running errands for the Bantrys. I saw him here the other day, posting a letter. Gibbs nodded, his hands steady now, but his eyes guarded. Thomas is in often enough. Letters, parcels, the usual. Steady sort, Thomas. Miss Marple. Needles clicked, her thoughts racing. Gibbs was deflecting, but his unease betrayed knowledge. She needed a glimpse into his world, his records, his contacts. As she paid for her stamp, her eyes fell on a ledger on the counter, its leather cover. Worn, but its pages crisp. It was open to a list of transactions, with names and dates in a neat hand. She couldn't read it from her seat, but its presence was a clue. A window into Gibbs's dealings. Thank you, Mr. Gibbs, she said, rising. I'll be back tomorrow, I expect. My nephew's so fond of my letters. As she stepped outside, the bell jingling behind her, Miss Marple's mind buzzed. The ledger was a tantalizing lead, but accessing it would require finesse. Gibbs was cautious, and confronting him directly would only make him clam up. She needed a distraction, someone, to occupy him while she examined the ledger. Raymond, with his charm and knack for conversation, was the perfect ally. She sent a note to Raymond, who was staying at the Blue Boar Inn, asking him to meet her at the tea shop. Over scones and tea, she outlined her plan. Raymond would visit the post office later that day, posing as a writer researching village life, and engage Gibbs in a lengthy discussion about postal history. Meanwhile, Miss Marple would slip behind the counter, under the pretense of needing a form, and examine the ledger. Raymond's eyes sparkled with mischief. Aunt Jane, you're a regular mastermind. I'll have Gibbs talking about stamps till kingdom come. Just don't get caught snooping. Miss Marple smiled, her needles clicking. I've been snooping longer than you've been writing, Raymond. Leave it to me. That afternoon, as the village settled into its quiet rhythm, Raymond strode into the post office, his notebook in hand and his manner effusive. Mr. Gibbs, just the man I need, he said, his voice carrying. I'm working on a piece about rural post offices, and I hear you're the expert. Tell me, how far back do your records go? Gibbs, caught off guard, blinked but warmed to the flattery. Records. Oh, we've got ledgers going back 50 years, sir. Quite a history, this place. As Raymond launched into a barrage of questions, Miss Marple slipped into the post office, her basket swinging. She lingered by the counter, pretending to rummage for a pen, her eyes on the ledger. Gibbs was engrossed in Raymond's tales of London publishing, his back turned. Miss Marple moved swiftly, her heart steady despite the risk, and flipped open the ledger. The pages were filled with entries, names, dates, parcel descriptions, but one caught her eye. C. to London. Sapphire item, 12/6. The date matched. The day after the gala, and the initials C. could only mean Carver. She scanned further, noting recurring entries for L. Likely Lyland payments to a G, which she suspected was Gibbs himself. The ledger was a map of the smuggling ring, detailing transactions of jewels and other valuables. Miss Marple memorized the key entries, her fingers itching to take the ledger, but knowing it would raise alarms. She closed it gently and stepped back just as Gibbs turned, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Miss Marple," he said, his smile tight. "Didn't see you there. Need another stamp?" "Just a form, Mr. Gibbs," she said, her voice airy. "But I've changed my mind. Thank you, and good day." She left the post office, her heart racing, but her face serene. Raymond followed. Soon after, his grin wide. "Did you get it, Aunt Jane?" "I did," she said, her eyes twinkling. "Mr. Gibbs is up to his neck in it, Raymond. That ledger confirms he's part of a smuggling ring, handling stolen goods with Carver and Lyle. The necklace is likely in London by now, but Gibbs is the key to tracing it." Back in her cottage, Miss Marple sat by the fire, her knitting in her lap, and pieced together the day's findings. The ledger's entries, combined with the mill meeting, painted a clear picture. Gibbs was orchestrating the theft, using his position to coordinate with Carver and Lyle. Thomas was a pawn coerced by blackmail, and Clara an unwitting messenger. The necklace's trail led to London, but Gibbs's role was now undeniable. She would need to share this with Sir Henry Clethering, whose Scotland Yard connections could track the buyer. But she also needed to protect Thomas and Clara from Gibbs's reach. As the fire crackled, Miss Marple's needles clicked, stitching together the threads of the mystery. The postmaster's ploy had been exposed, but the game was far from over. The necklace was out there, and she was determined to bring it home. Chapter 10. A web of lice. The morning sun bathed St. Mary Mead in a gentle glow, its rays filtering through the lace curtains of Miss Jane Marple's cottage, where she sat with a cup of tea and her knitting basket at her side. The revelations of the past days had woven a complex tapestry in her mind. Thomas's confession of stealing the Bantry necklace under Carver's blackmail, Clara's role as an unwitting messenger, the coded note pointing to a midnight meeting at the old mill, and Mr. Gibbs's unexpected appearance as a key player in the scheme. The postmaster's ledger, glimpsed during her visit to the post office, had confirmed his involvement in a smuggling ring, with entries linking him to Carver and Mr. Lyle, the charming art dealer whose sapphire ring had raised her suspicions. Today, Miss Marple resolved to confront Lyle, not with accusations, but with the subtle probing that had unravelled many a lie in her time. She needed to confirm his role and uncover the identity of the mysterious buyer in London. Miss Marple donned her tweed coat and black shawl, tucking her knitting into her basket, and set out for the Blue Boar Inn, where Lyle was staying. The village was alive with its usual rhythm, children scampering to school, the milkman's cart rattling by, and Mrs. Puddacombe sweeping the step of her tea shop. Miss Marple's steps were measured, her mind sharp as she rehearsed her approach. Lyle's polished charm was a formidable shield, but she had faced such masks before, and she knew how to find the cracks. The Blue Boar's parlour was quiet, its low ceiling and crackling fire creating a cosy atmosphere that belied the tension of her mission. Lyle greeted her with his usual flair, rising from a chair by the window, his dark hair swept back and his smile as smooth as polished silver. "Miss Marple, what a delight," he said, extending a hand. "Have you come to admire my collection again, or is it my company you seek?" Miss Marple smiled, her blue eyes twinkling with deceptive innocence. "A bit of both, perhaps, Mr. Lyle. I've been thinking about that lovely sapphire ring you showed me. It stayed in my mind, so like the Bantry necklace. I thought we My chat about your work, it's so fascinating. Lyle's smile didn't waver, but Miss Marple caught the briefest flicker of caution in his eyes. I'm flattered by your interest, he said, gesturing to a chair. Tea. I have some fine Darjeeling, perfect for a morning chat. She accepted, settling into the chair and pulling out her knitting. The rhythmic click of her needles a soothing counterpoint to the charged air. Thank you, Mr. Lyle. I've been wondering about your suppliers. You mentioned contacts across Europe, such a wide net. I suppose you work with all sorts, trustworthy and otherwise. Lyle poured the tea, his movements graceful but deliberate. Trust is the cornerstone of my trade, Miss Marple. I deal only with reputable sources, auction houses, private estates, the occasional collector, but I won't deny the art world has its shadows. You hear rumors of stolen goods, but I steer clear of such things. Of course, Miss Marple said, her tone light. Though with the Bantry necklace missing, one can't help but wonder. The village is full of talksome, say it's already in London, with a buyer waiting. You were at the gala, weren't you? Did you notice anyone near the display case? Lyle's fingers tightened slightly on the teapot, a movement so subtle it might have gone unnoticed by anyone less observant. I was admiring the necklace, as I told you, he said, his voice smooth. A magnificent piece, poorly secured. I warned Colonel Bantry about that case, but he's a man of tradition. As for the guests, it was a busy night, people milling, about too many to keep track of. Miss Marple's needles clicked, her mind cataloguing his words. His mention of the case's security echoed his earlier comments, but it felt rehearsed, a deflection. She decided to press further, her voice as gentle as a summer breeze. I'm sure it was, though I hear you've been seen with a man named Carver, a rough sort who's no stranger to stolen goods. And then there's Mr. Gibbs, the postmaster, who seems to know more than he lets on. It's curious, isn't it, how small villages breed such connections. Lyle's smile faltered, a crack in his polished facade. Carver, he said, his tone light but edged with steel. I don't know the man. As for Gibbs, he's just... The postmaster handles my parcels to London, nothing more. You've been listening to village gossip, Miss Marple. It's not always reliable. Gossip can be a guide, Mr. Lyle, she said, her eyes meeting his. Like a map, it points to the truth, even if the lines are blurred. I saw a ledger at the post office, with entries for parcels sent to London, some marked with your initials, and others for a C. I wonder, could that be Carver? And might those parcels include a certain sapphire? Lyle's face hardened, his charm giving way to a cold alertness. For a moment, silence hung between them, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the click of her needles. Then he leaned back, his smile returning but lacking its former warmth. You're a sharp one, Miss Marple, he said. I'll give you that, but you're fishing in deep waters. I'm no thief, I'm a middleman, nothing more. I move goods for clients, and I don't ask too many questions. That's the business. Miss Marple's heart quickened, but her face remained serene. A middleman, she said softly, for the Bantry necklace, perhaps, to a buyer in London. Lyle's eyes narrowed, but he nodded, a calculated risk. All right, I'll play straight with you. I was approached to handle a sapphire piece, no questions asked. I didn't steal it, but I agreed to pass it along. The buyer's in London. A private collector. That's all I know. I didn't ask for names, and I didn't get them. Miss Marple nodded, her needles never faltering. His admission was a breakthrough, confirming his role in the smuggling ring. And who approached you, Mr. Lyle? Carver, or perhaps Mr. Gibbs? Lyle hesitated, his fingers drumming on the arm of his chair. Gibbs, he said finally. He's the one with the connections. Carver's just the muscle, the go-between. Gibbs runs the show-nose, the buyers, sets the drops. But you didn't hear that from me. Miss Marple's mind raced, the pieces falling into place. Gibbs, as the mastermind, explained the ledger's entries, the coded notes, and the meeting at the mill. Lyle was a link in the chain, not the orchestrator, but his role was crucial. Thank you, Mr. Lyle, she said, rising. You've been most helpful. I trust you'll keep this between us, for now. Lyle's smile was wry. You've got my word, Miss Marple. But be careful. Gibbs doesn't like loose ends. She left the Blue Boar, her basket swinging, her thoughts buzzing. Lyle's confession had illuminated the web of lies. But the necklace was still out there, likely in Carver's hands, bound for London. She needed to act quickly, before the trail vanished. Back in her cottage, she wrote to Sir Henry, detailing Lyle's admission and the ledger's evidence, and asked him to trace the buyer in London. As she sealed the letter, her needles clicked, stitching together the threads of the mystery. The web was unraveling, and Miss Marple was determined to follow it to its heart. Chapter 11. The London Connection. The train to London rattled through the countryside, its rhythmic clatter a counterpoint to the quiet intensity of Miss Jane Marple's thoughts. Seated by the window, her knitting basket at her feet and her black shawl draped neatly over her shoulders, she watched the rolling fields give way to the smoky sprawl of the city. Her nephew, Raymond West, sat across from her, his notebook open but his pen idle, his eyes bright with the thrill of their mission. The Bantry necklace, stolen from Gossington Hall, was now in London. According to Mr. Lyle's confessioner, sapphire and diamond treasure bound for a private buyer. Miss Marple's investigation had uncovered a smuggling ring led by Mr. Gibbs, with Carver as the muscle and Lyle as the middleman. Today, she and Raymond were headed to an upscale auction house, where a tip from Sir Henry Clithering suggested the necklace might surface in a discreet private sale. Aunt Jane, you're sure this auction house is the place? Raymond asked, his voice low despite the empty carriage. London's a big city. That necklace could be anywhere. I'm not sure, Raymond, Miss Marple replied, her needles clicking softly as she worked on a scarf. But Sir Henry's contact was quite specific. The auction house Harrington's in Mayfair has a reputation for handling rare items off the books. If the necklace is here, we'll find it. Raymond grinned, his writer's imagination alight. It's like something out of one of my novels. A stolen jewel, a secret sale, and us playing detectives in the heart of London. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, but her tone was firm. We're not playing, Raymond. We're observing. The necklace is close, and we mustn't spook the buyer or Carver if he's there. The train pulled into Paddington Station, its platform bustling with travellers and porters. Miss Marple and Raymond made their way to Mayfair, the city's elegance a stark contrast to St. Mary Mead's quiet charm. Harrington's auction house was a grand building with marble columns and velvet curtains, its discreet sign hinting at the wealth within. Miss Marple had prepared her disguise, a widow's black dress and a veiled hat, borrowed from a friend in the village, posing as Mrs. Lavender, a wealthy collector with an interest in rare jewels. Raymond, in a tailored suit, played her nephew, escorting her with a mix of deference and curiosity. Inside, the auction house was a hive of understated opulence, with crystal chandeliers casting soft light over mahogany panels. A clerk greeted them, his smile professional but probing. "Mrs. Lavender, Mr. West," he said, checking their invitation, forged with Sir Henry's help. "Welcome to Harrington's. The private sale is in the upstairs salon. May I show you?" The catalogue. Miss Marple accepted the catalogue, her gloved fingers turning the pages with care. The listed items were exquisite emeralds, rubies, antique brooches, but no sapphire necklace appeared. She exchanged a glance with Raymond, who nodded slightly. The necklace, if here, would be offered off the record, as Sir Henry had warned. They were ushered to the salon, a plush room with velvet chairs and a small platform for displays. A dozen or so guests were present, their attire and manner marking them as collectors or agents. Miss Marple settled into a chair near the back, her knitting in her lap, her eyes scanning the room. Raymond stood by her side, his notebook discreetly tucked away, his gaze alert. The auctioneer, a sleek man with a clipped accent, began the sale, presenting items with a practiced flourish. Miss Marple watched the guests, noting their reactions, nod here, a whispered word there. Halfway through, the auctioneer paused, his smile conspiratorial. "And now, for our discerning clients, a private offering. A rare sapphire piece, available for viewing by appointment." Miss Marple's heart quickened, her needles pausing. The auctioneer gestured to a side door, where a clerk led a few guests, including a tall man with a familiar scar over one eye. She leaned toward Raymond, her voice barely audible. "That's him. Follow, but keep your distance." Raymond nodded, slipping out to trail the group. Miss Marple remained, her eyes on the room, where a woman in a burgundy gown caught her attention. She was older, with sharp features and a regal air, her fingers adorned with rings that glittered in the light. She had signaled to Carver during the announcement, a subtle gesture that spoke of familiarity. Miss Marple memorized her face, suspecting she was the poirot, an agent for one. Raymond returned minutes later, his expression tense. "They're in a private room, Aunt Jane," he whispered. Carver showed the necklace or part of it, just the sapphire pendant. The clerk called it a unique acquisition. "They're arranging a sale for tomorrow." Miss Marple nodded, her mind racing. The necklace was here, or at least its centerpiece, likely dismantled to avoid detection. Carver's presence confirmed Lyle's story, but the woman in burgundy was a new piece in the puzzle. She rose, her movements slow to avoid attention, and suggested they leave. "We've seen enough, Raymond. Let's not outstay our welcome." Outside, the London air was thick with coal smoke and the clamour of carriages. Miss Marple and Raymond found a quiet tea shop nearby, where she outlined her next steps over a pot of Earl Grey. "The woman in burgundy is our key," she said, her needles clicking. "She's likely the buyer, or close to them. We need her. Identity and Sir Henry can help. Carver's here, which means the necklace hasn't been sold yet. We have time." Raymond sipped his tea, his eyes wide. "You think Gibbs sent Carver to her? He's running the show, isn't he?" "Mr. seems to be," Miss Marple said. "But every ring has a leader, and I suspect Gibbs is it. The ledger, the coded notes, the mill meeting all point to him. But the buyer is the end of the chain, and we must follow her." They returned to St. Mary Mead that evening, the train's motion lulling Miss Marple into a reflective mood. She thought of Thomas, coerced by Carver's blackmail, and Clara, caught in Gibbs's web of fear. The necklace's trail had led her to London, but the heart of the mystery lay in the village, where Gibbs watched and waited. Back in her cottage, she wrote to Sir Henry, describing the woman in Burgundy and requesting her identity, along with any information on Harrington's private sales. As she sealed the letter, her needles clicked, a promise to unravel the web of lies that had ensnared St. Mary Mead. Chapter 12. The buyer's shadow. The late morning light streamed through the lace curtains of Miss Jane Marple's cottage, casting delicate patterns on the polished oak table where she sat, her knitting needles clicking in a steady rhythm. The air was thick with the scent of tea and the faint perfume of roses from her garden, but her mind was far from the tranquil beauty of St. Mary Mead. The trail of the stolen Bantry necklace had led her to London, where she and Raymond had glimpsed the sapphire pendant at Harrington's auction house, in the hands of Carver and a mysterious woman in Burgundy. Likely the buyer or her agent, Mr. Gibbs, the village postmaster, had emerged as the mastermind of the smuggling ring, with Mr. Lyle as the middleman and Carver as the muscle. A letter from Sir Henry Clithering, due any moment, promised to reveal the woman's identity. But Miss Marple knew the heart of the mystery lay in St. Mary Mead, where Gibbs's quiet control held sway. Today, she planned to set a trap for the postmaster, using his own greed to unravel the web of deceit. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her eyes on the lane outside, where the postman's bicycle wobbled into view. She rose, smoothing her tweed skirt, and met him at the gate, accepting a thick envelope bearing Sir Henry's precise handwriting. Back at her table, she opened it, her heart quickening as she read. The woman in Burgundy was Lady Eleanor Vance, a wealthy collector known for acquiring rare jewels through discreet channels. Sir Henry's contacts at Scotland Yard confirmed her reputation for dealing with less than reputable sellers, though no evidence had ever pinned her to a crime. The sapphire pendant, he noted, had been offered at Harrington's as a private acquisition, with Carver listed as the seller and Gibbs as the intermediary. Sir Henry urged caution, warning that Lady Vance's connections made her a formidable adversary. Miss Marple's needles paused, her mind racing. Lady Vance was the buyer, and Gibbs was the linchpin, coordinating the sale through his postal network. The necklace, or at least its sapphire centerpiece, was still in London. But Gibbs's role in St. Mary Mead gave her an advantage. She needed to draw him out, to force a mistake that would expose his operation and recover the necklace. Her plan was simple but bold. She would plant a rumor of a new buyer in the village, someone eager to purchase stolen jewels, and let Gibbs's greed lead him to her. She enlisted Raymond, whose flair for storytelling made him ideal for spreading the rumor. Over tea at Mrs. Puddicombe's shop, he would casually mention a wealthy friend from London, a Mr. Harrow, who was visiting St. Mary Mead and looking to acquire rare items, no questions asked. Miss Marple would pose as Mr. Harrow's aunt, a harmless old lady with a keen interest in jewels, and invite Gibbs to discuss a potential deal. The trap would be set at her cottage, where she could control the environment and observe his reactions. Raymond arrived at noon, his eyes bright with excitement. "Aunt Jane, this is positively thrilling," he said, settling into a chair. "Planting a rumor, setting a trap here, outdoing my best plots. Are you sure Gibbs will take the bait? Greed is a reliable law, Raymond," Miss Marple replied, her needles clicking. "Mr. Gibbs has been running this scheme too long to resist a new buyer. We'll make it irresistible." They set out for the tea shop, where the villagers' gossip network was already humming. Mrs. Price was there, holding court with Miss Weatherby and Mrs. Hartnell, their voices low but eager. Miss Marple took a corner table, her knitting in her lap, while Raymond ordered scones and launched into his tale. "I had a letter from a friend in London, a Mr. Harrow," he said, loud enough for the nearby table to hear. "He's coming to St. Mary Mead for a rest, but he's mad about collecting jewels, paintings, you name it. Says he's looking for something special, no questions asked. I told him the village might surprise him." Mrs. Price's eyes lit up, her teacup forgotten. "No questions asked, you say? Well, that's interesting. We've had our share of odd characters lately, what with that art dealer, Lyle, and the talk about the Bantry necklace." Miss Marple watched from her corner, her needles clicking softly. The rumour took root, spreading like wildfire as Mrs. Price leaned toward her companions, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. By the time Miss Marple and Raymond left the tea shop, the village was abuzz with talk of Mr. Harrow, the mysterious collector. The next step was to invite Gibbs to her cottage. Miss Marple stopped by the post office, her pretext a parcel for Raymond. Gibbs greeted her with his usual bland smile, but his eyes were wary, as if sensing the net tightening. "Good afternoon, Miss Marple," he said, weighing the parcel. "Another package for your nephew?" "Yes, Mr. Gibbs," she replied, her tone light. "And I was wondering if you might help with a small matter. My nephew's friend, Mr. Harrow, is visiting, and he's keen on rare jewels. I hear you handle such things with your connections in London. Could you call at my cottage tomorrow evening? I'd love to discuss it." Gibbs's smile faltered, a flicker of suspicion crossing his face, but greed won out. "Jewels, ma'am. I'm just a postmaster, but I'd be happy to chat. Tomorrow evening, then?" Miss Marple nodded, her heart quickening but her face serene. The trap was set. She spent the afternoon preparing her cottage, arranging chairs by the fire and placing her knitting basket strategically to keep her hands occupied and her demeanour unthreatening. Raymond would be nearby, hidden in the garden, ready to intervene if needed. The following evening, as the village clock struck 7, Gibbs arrived, his coat damp from a light drizzle. Miss Marple welcomed him with a warm smile, ushering him to a chair by the fire. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Gibbs," she said, pouring tea. "Mr. Harrow is delayed, but I thought we might discuss his interests. He's particularly fond of sapphires, you see, like the Bantry necklace." Gibbs's eyes narrowed, but he sipped his tea, his voice cautious. "Sapphires are fine things, ma'am, but I don't deal in jewels, just post. What's this Mr. Harrow looking for?" Miss Marple's needles clicked, her tone gentle but probing. "Something unique, perhaps recently acquired. I hear you've sent parcels to London, some linked to a man named Carver, and there's talk of a sapphire piece, much like the one stolen from Gossington Hall." Gibbs's hand tightened on his cup, a flush creeping up his neck. "You've been listening to gossip, Miss Marple. I don't know any Carver, and I don't deal in stolen goods." "Of course," she said, her smile disarming. "But I saw your ledger, Mr. Gibbs, with entries for C and L. Carver and Lyle, I presume. And I know about the meeting at the mill, where you discussed a buyer. Lady Vance, perhaps." Gibbs's face paled, his composure cracking. "You're meddling in things you don't understand, ma'am," he said, his voice low. "Leave it be, or you'll regret it." Miss Marple's needles never faltered, her voice steady. "I understand more than you think, Mr. Gibbs. You're running a smuggling ring, using your post office to move stolen goods. Thomas was blackmailed, Clara was frightened, and Lyle was your middleman. But the necklace is still out there, and I intend to find it." Gibbs rose, his eyes blazing, but before he could speak, a knock at the door startled him. It was Sir Henry Clithering, his presence commanding as he stepped inside, followed by Raymond. "Miss Marple, I got your telegram," Sir Henry said, his gaze fixed on Gibbs, "and I've brought a friend from Scotland Yard." Gibbs froze, his face a mask of panic. Miss Marple smiled, her needles clicking. "Thank you, Sir Henry. Mr. Gibbs was just about to tell us about the necklace. Weren't you, Mr. Gibbs?" The postmaster's shoulders sagged, defeat settling over him. "All right," he said, his voice hoarse. "I'll talk, but it wasn't my idea. Lady Vanshe's the one who wanted the necklace I just made." "It happened." Miss Marple nodded, her heart light but her resolve firm. The buyer's shadow had been revealed, and the necklace was within reach. The trap had sprung, and the web of lies was unraveling. Chapter 13. The net closes. The evening air in St. Mary Mead carried a crisp edge, the village settling into a quiet hush as the stars emerged above the thatched roofs. Miss Jane Marple sat by her parlour fire, her knitting needles clicking softly. The warmth of the flames a contrast to the chill of the mystery that had consumed her thoughts. Mr. Gibbs's confession, extracted in her cottage with Sir Henry Clithering's timely arrival, had confirmed his role as the mastermind of the smuggling ring that stole the Bantry necklace. Lady Eleanor Vance, the wealthy collector in London, was the buyer, and the sapphire pendant was still in the city, likely in Carver's hands. The web of deceit woven through Thomas's blackmail, Clara's fear, Mr. Lyle's complicity, and Gibbs's orchestration was unravelling, but the necklace remained out of reach. Tonight, Miss Marple and Sir Henry planned to close the net, coordinating with Scotland Yard to intercept the sale and recover the Bantry heirloom. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her eyes on the letter from Sir Henry that lay open on the table. His contacts had traced Lady Vance to a discreet townhouse in Mayfair, where she was expecting delivery of the sapphire pendant tomorrow evening. Carver was to make the handoff, and Gibbs, now under pressure, had agreed to cooperate with the police to avoid a harsher sentence. Miss Marple had insisted on returning to London with Sir Henry, her quiet resolve masking a determination to see the case through. Raymond, her nephew, would join them, his keen eyes and quick wit a valuable asset. As the clock struck 8, a knock at the door announced Sir Henry's arrival. He entered, his silver hair catching the firelight, his expression a mix of respect and amusement. "Jane, you've outdone yourself," he said, settling into a chair. Gibbs's confession was a coup, and Scotland Yard's ready to move. "On Lady Vance, are you sure you want to come to London? It could be dangerous." Miss Marple's needles clicked, her smile serene. "Danger is relative, Henry. I've faced sharper tongues in this village than any London criminal could muster. I want to see the necklace returned to Dolly Bantry, and I need to ensure Thomas and Clara are safe." Sir Henry nodded, his eyes warm. "Very well, we leave at dawn. Inspector Craddock will meet us at Paddington, and will set up a sting. At Lady Vance's townhouse, Carver's the key. He's got the pendant, and he's not likely to go quietly." Miss Marple's thoughts turned to Thomas, whose blackmail-driven theft had set this chain in motion, and Clara, whose fear had kept her silent. She had spoken to them both that afternoon, assuring them of her protection if they cooperated fully. Thomas, pale and contrite, had promised to testify against Gibbs and Carver, while Clara, tearful but relieved, had handed over another coded note found in the church pure backup plan. It seemed for a secondary drop if the London sale failed. Miss Marple had decoded it as Riverbank Dawn. suggesting a fallback location near St. Mary Mead's River, which she shared with Sir Henry Dot. The train to London the next morning was a flurry of anticipation. Raymond, seated beside Miss Marple, scribbled notes for a novel he swore would immortalize her sleuthing, while she knitted quietly, her mind mapping the day's strategy. At Paddington, Inspector Craddock greeted them, his young face serious, but respectful. "Miss Marple, Sir Henry," he said, tipping his hat. "We've got men watching Lady Vance's townhouse. Carver's been spotted in the area, and Gibbs has given us the time of the Hand of Fate o'clock tonight." Miss Marple nodded, her needles tucked away as they boarded a taxi to Mayfair. The townhouse was a grand affair, its windows curtained, and its door guarded by a discreet footman. Craddock's men, dressed as tradesmen, loitered nearby, their eyes sharp. Miss Marple and Raymond took a position across the street, in a small cafe with a view of the entrance. She wore her widow's disguise again, as Mrs. Lavender, to avoid recognition, while Raymond posed as her nephew, his binoculars hidden in a newspaper as dusk settled over London. The streets grew quiet, the gaslights casting long shadows. Miss Marple's eyes were fixed on the townhouse, where a carriage pulled up at precisely 8. Carver stepped out, his scar unmistakable, a small package clutched in his hand. He glanced around, his movements tense, then entered the townhouse. Miss Marple's heart quickened, her fingers itching for her needles but remaining still. "Got the pendant," she whispered to Raymond. "Now we wait." Minutes later, Lady Vance appeared at the door, her burgundy gown striking against the pale stone. She spoke briefly to Carver, her gestures sharp, then took the package and retreated inside. Craddock's men moved in, swift and silent, surrounding the townhouse. Miss Marple and Raymond followed at a distance, joining Sir Henry and Craddock in a nearby alley where they could observe without being seen. The raid was quick and precise. Craddock's men entered through a side door, their voices low but authoritative. Miss Marple caught glimpses of movement through the window's Carver's raised hands, Lady Vance's indignant posture, and the glint of the sapphire pendant as it was seized as evidence. Within minutes, both were in custody, and Craddock emerged, holding the pendant triumphantly. "We've got it, Miss Marple," he said, his face alight. "And a ledger from Lady Vance's study, detailing her purchases. Gibbs's name is all over it." Miss Marple's smile was quiet but satisfied. "Well done, Inspector. And the necklaces, it intact?" Craddock nodded, opening the package to reveal the sapphire pendant, its diamonds sparkling in the lamplight. "The setting's been altered, but it's the Bantry piece, no doubt. We'll have it restored before returning it to Mrs. Bantry, sir." Henry clapped a hand on Craddock's shoulder, then turned to Miss Marple. "You've done it again, Jane. Your trap for Gibbs led us straight to this moment. Scotland Yard owes you a debt." Miss Marple waved off the praise, her eyes on the pendant. "It was a group effort, Henry. Thomas and Clara played their parts, and your contacts were invaluable. But we must ensure Gibbs faces justice, and that Thomas and Clara are protected." They returned to St. Mary Mead that night, the train's rhythm a soothing backdrop to Miss Marple's thoughts. Gibbs was already in custody, his smuggling ring exposed by his own ledger and the confessions of Thomas and Lyle. Clara, freed from her fear, had agreed to testify, her relief palpable. The necklace would be restored and returned to Dolly Bantry, whose joy would no doubt fill Gossington Hall with chatter for weeks. Back in her cottage, Miss Marple sat by the fire, her knitting resuming its familiar rhythm. The net had closed, but she knew the village would soon find another mystery to whisper about. For now, she was content to let her needles click, stitching together the piece of St. Mary Mead until the next thread of intrigue appeared. Chapter 14. A quiet triumph. The late afternoon sun bathed St. Mary Mead in a golden glow, its rays filtering through the lace curtains of Miss Jane Marple's cottage, where she sat by her parlour window, her knitting needles clicking in a steady, soothing rhythm. The Bantry necklace, or at least its sapphire pendant, had been recovered from Lady Eleanor Vance's townhouse in London, thanks to the sting orchestrated with Sir Henry Clethering and Inspector Craddock. Mr. Gibbs, the postmaster, was in custody, his smuggling ring exposed by his own ledger and the confessions of Thomas, the coerced butler, and Mr. Lyle, the complicit art dealer. Carver, the rough fence, faced charges alongside Lady Vance, and the necklace was being restored for its return to Dolly Bantry. Yet, as Miss Marple sipped her tea, her mind lingered on the case, its threads neatly tied but hinting at a new mystery stirring in the village's quiet corners. The high street was bustling as Miss Marple stepped out, her black shawl draped over her shoulders and her knitting basket swinging lightly. Gossington Hall was her destination, where Dolly Bantry had invited her to celebrate the necklace's recovery. The village was abuzz with the news, the gossip network humming with tales of Miss Marple's sleuthing, though she deflected such praise with her usual modesty. As she passed Mrs. Puddicombe's tea shop, she caught snippets of conversation, Mrs. Price speculating about Gibbs's downfall, Miss Weatherby tutting over Clara's involvement, and old Mr. Tuttle marvelling at the necklace's journey to London and back at Gossington Hall. The air was festive, the manor's windows glowing warmly against the fading light. Dolly Bantry greeted her at the door, her green eyes sparkling with relief. "Jane, you absolute marvel," she exclaimed, pulling her into a hug. "The necklace is coming back tomorrow, and it's all because of you. Come, we're having tea in the drawing-room. Colonel Bantry's positively beaming." Miss Marple smiled, her blue eyes twinkling. "I only followed the clues, Dolly. The real work was done by Sir Henry and the police. How is Thomas Ferry?" Dolly's face softened as she led Miss Marple to the drawing-room, where a small group, Sir Henry, Raymond, and a few local gentry gathered around a tea tray. "Thomas is shaken, poor man, but grateful you protected him. He's staying on. And Clara too. They're both so sorry for their part in it." Miss Marple nodded, settling into a chair and pulling out her knitting. Thomas and Clara had been pawns in Gibbs's scheme, their fear and loyalty exploited by his cunning. She had ensured their cooperation with the police would shield them from harsh punishment, and their relief had been palpable. The drawing-room was alive with chatter, Colonel Bantry recounting the galla's chaos with a new-found lightness, while Sir Henry praised Miss Marple's uncanny knack for seeing what others miss. As she sipped her tea, Miss Marple's eyes wandered to the display case where the necklace had once sat, its lock now reinforced with a modern mechanism. The case was empty, but its presence reminded her of the scratches she'd noticed weeks ago, faint marks that had first hinted at an inside job. Her thoughts were interrupted by Clara, who entered with a fresh pot of tea, her face less pale, but still cautious. "Miss Marple," she said softly, "I wanted to thank you. You believed me when I was so scared." "You did the right thing, Clara," Miss Marple replied, her voice gentle. "Fear can make us do strange things, but honesty sets us free." Clara nodded, a small smile breaking through, and returned to the kitchen. Miss Marple's needles clicked, her mind turning to Gibbs. His confession had revealed a man driven by greed, using his position to funnel stolen goods through the post office, Yet a detail nagged at her, a passing remark from Mrs. Price about a new face in the village, seen near the post office the day before Gibbs's arrest. It was a loose thread, one she couldn't ignore. After tea, she excused herself to the garden, where the roses glowed in the twilight. Raymond followed, sensing her unease. "Aunt Jane, you've got that look," he said, his grin teasing. "The case is solved. The necklace is coming back. Why aren't you basking in your triumph?" Miss Marple's smile was wry. "A triumph is only as good as its permanence, Raymond. There's a new face in the village, according to Mrs. Price. Someone near the post office, just before Gibbs was taken. It may be nothing, but I've learned to trust such threads." Raymond's eyes widened. "You think there's another player? Someone Gibbs didn't mention?" "Perhaps," she said, her needles clicking. "Or a replacement, stepping into his shoes. Smuggling rings don't collapse so easily, they adapt. We'll keep an eye out." The next morning, Miss Marple visited. Mrs. Price at the butcher's shop, her pretext a cut of lamb for Sunday dinner. The shop was quiet, the scent of sawdust and meat mingling with the hum of gossip. Mrs. Price greeted her with a knowing smile. "Miss Marple, you're the talk of the village. That necklace business, my Bert says you're sharper than Scotland Yard." Miss Marple waved off the compliment, her tone light. "I only listen, Mrs. Price. Speaking of which, you mentioned a new face near the post office. Have you seen them again?" Mrs. Price's eyes gleamed, eager to share. "Oh, yes. Bert saw him yesterday, a young man, sharp-dressed, with a city look. Hanging about the post office, looking at the windows. Didn't go in, just watched, then left. Bert says he had a satchel, like he was carrying something important." Miss Marple's heart quickened, but her face remained serene. How curious. Did Bert catch his name, or where he went? "No name," Mrs. Price said, wrapping the lamb. "But he headed toward the Red Lion. Might be staying there." Miss Marple thanked her and left, her thoughts buzzing. A new face, city-dressed, near the post office, it suggested someone was picking up where Gibbs left off. The Red Lion was a logical place to start, and she enlisted Raymond to investigate, asking him to pose as a writer seeking local color. That evening, he returned to her cottage, his notebook filled with scribbles. "You were right, Aunt Jane," he said, his voice low with excitement. "There's a chap at the Red Lion, calls himself Mr. Ellis. Young, slick, with a London accent. He was asking the barman about local deliveries, parcels, that sort of thing. Sounded like he was fishing for information about the post office." Miss Marple's needles clicked, her mind racing. "Mr. Ellis," she murmured. "He may be a courier or someone higher up, checking on Gibbs's operation. We'll need to watch him, Raymond, but discreetly." She wrote to Sir Henry, alerting him to this new figure and suggesting a background check on Mr. Ellis. As she sealed the letter, her thoughts turned to the broader picture. The smuggling ring had been disrupted, but its roots ran deep, and this new player hinted at a network that extended beyond St. Mary Mead. The necklace's recovery was a triumph, but the mystery was far from over. The following day, Dolly arrived at Miss Marple's cottage, the restored necklace gleaming in a velvet box. "Jane, it's perfect," she exclaimed, her eyes misty. "You've given us back more than a jewel, you've given us peace." Miss Marple smiled, her needles clicking. "I'm glad, Dolly, but keep that case locked tight and your eyes open. The village is quiet, but it's never still." As Dolly left, Miss Marple sat by the fire, her knitting in her lap. the new mystery of Mr. Ellis taking shape in her mind. The net had closed on Gibbs, but another thread was unravelling, and she was ready to follow it, stitch by careful stitch. Chapter 15. The newcomer's game. The early morning mist draped St. Mary Mead in a soft, silvery veil, softening the edges of the village's thatched cottages and cobblestone lanes. Miss Jane Marple sat at her breakfast table, her knitting needles clicking softly, a cup of tea steaming beside her. The recovery of the Bantry necklace had brought a quiet triumph to Gossington Hall, but the emergence of a new figure, Mr. Ellis, the sharp-dressed stranger seen near the post office, had stirred a fresh thread in the tapestry of the smuggling ring. Mr. Gibbs's confession had exposed his role as the mastermind, with Carver and Mr. Lyle as his accomplices, but Miss Marple instincts told her the ring's roots ran deeper, and Mr. Ellis was a clue to its resilience. Today, she resolved to uncover his purpose, using the village's gossip network and her own keen observation to unravel the newcomer's game. Miss Marple donned her tweed coat and black shawl, tucking her knitting into her basket, and stepped into the cool air. The high street was waking, with the milkman's cart rattling by and children scampering toward the schoolhouse. Her first stop was the Red Lion, where Raymond had spotted Mr. Ellis asking about local deliveries. The pub was quiet in the morning, its wooden beams and polished bar giving it a cosy charm. The barman, Mr. Tuttle, greeted her with a nod, wiping a glass with a cloth. "Morning, Miss Marple. Bit early for you, isn't it?" "Good morning, Mr. Tuttle," she replied, her smile gentle. "I've come to ask about a guest, Mr. Ellis, I believe. My nephew mentioned he's staying here, and I'm curious about new faces in the village." Mr. Tuttle's eyes flickered with recognition, but his tone was cautious. "LSI checked in 2 days ago. City type, sharp suit, keeps to himself. Asked about the post office, wanted to know about parcel schedules. Didn't say much else." Miss Marple's needles clicked as she sat at a corner table, her basket at her feet. How interesting. Did he mention where he's from, or why he's here? "Not a word," Mr. Tuttle said, leaning closer. "But he met a fellow last night, out back by the stables. Looked like a private chat kept, their voices low. The other chap was older, with a limp. Didn't get a good look, but they seemed in a hurry." Miss Marple's heart quickened, but her face remained serene. A meeting at the Red Lion, so soon after Gibbs's arrest, suggested Mr. Ellis was stepping into the postmaster's role, reporting to someone higher up. "Thank you, Mr. Tuttle," she said, rising. "You've been most helpful." She left the pub, her thoughts buzzing. The older man with a limp was a new figure, possibly a superior in the smuggling ring, and Mr. Ellis's interest in the post office hinted at a plan to revive Gibbs's operation. She decided to visit Mrs. Price at the butcher's shop, knowing the woman's gossip would offer more clues. The shop's bell jingled as she entered, the scent of sawdust and meat greeting her. Mrs. Price looked up, her eyes gleaming with curiosity. "Miss Marple, come to hear the latest. The village is still talking about that necklace business." Miss Marple smiled, settling onto a stool. "I'm sure it is, Mrs. Price, but I've heard about a new face, Mr. Ellis, staying at the Red Lion. Have you seen him?" Mrs. Price's knife paused mid-cut, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Oh, Bert, saw him yesterday, lurking by the post office. Sharp as a tack, that one, with a satchel full of papers. And Bert swears he saw him with old Mr. Harroway, the jeweller from Chipping Cleghorn. Limps something awful. Mr. Harroway does bad leg from the war." Miss Marple's needles paused. her mind seizing on the name. Mr. Harroway, a jeweller with a limp, fit Mr. Tuttle's description perfectly. Chipping Cleghorn was only a few miles away, and a jeweller's expertise would be invaluable in a smuggling ring, especially one dealing in stolen gems. Mr. Harroway, she murmured. How curious. Did Bert overhear anything? Not much, Mrs. Price said, wrapping a cut of beef. Just that they were talking about a shipment, something about getting it out quick. Bert thought it odd, with Gibbs locked up and all. Miss Marple nodded, her thoughts racing. Mr. Ellis and Mr. Harroway were likely planning to move another stolen item, perhaps to replace the lost necklace. She thanked Mrs. Price and left, her next stop the post office, now run by a temporary clerk since Gibbs's arrest. The clerk, a young woman named Miss Bates, was sorting letters with nervous efficiency. "Good morning, Miss Marple," she said, her voice timid. "Need a stamp?" "Just a letter for my nephew," Miss Marple replied, pulling an envelope from her basket. "You must be finding it quite a change, taking over from Mr. Gibbs. Have you had any unusual visitors lately?" Miss Bates flushed, her hands fumbling a letter. "Well, there was a man yesterday, Mr. Ellis," he said. "Asked about parcel records, wanted to know what Gibbs sent to London. I told him I couldn't share, but he was pushy." Miss Marple's smile was reassuring, but her mind was alert. "You did right, my dear. Did he leave anything behind, or meet anyone?" "He met an older man outside," Miss Bates said. "I saw them through the window, grey hair, limping. They didn't come in, just talked by the gate." Miss Marple thanked her and left, her basket swinging. Mr. Harroway's involvement was becoming clearer, and Mr. Ellis's persistence suggested he was tasked with salvaging the smuggling ring. She needed to confirm their plans, and the Red Lion was the place to start. She sent a note to Raymond, asking him to keep watch at the pub that evening, posing as a writer seeking local stories. Meanwhile, she wrote to Sir Henry Cleathering, requesting information on Mr. Harroway and any recent jewel thefts in Chipping Cleghorn that evening. Raymond returned to her cottage, his notebook brimming with notes. "Aunt Jane, you're on to something," he said, his eyes bright. "Ellis was at the Red Lion, in a back room with Harroway. I couldn't get close, but I heard them mention a new piece and a drop tomorrow night. Sounded like they're planning to move something soon." Miss Marple's needles clicked, her mind racing. "Tomorrow night," she murmured. "We need to know where. Did they say anything else?" Raymond nodded. "Harroway mentioned the old quarry near Chipping Cleghorn, said it's a good spot." "Out of sight," Ellis agreed, said he'd handle the delivery. The old quarry, desolate, rocky pit on the road to Chipping Cleghorn, was a perfect place for a clandestine drop. Miss Marple decided to stake it out with Raymond and Sir Henry's help. She telegraphed Sir Henry, asking him to join them with Inspector Craddock, and prepared for a late-night vigil. The quarry was a mile from St. Mary Mead, its paths rough, but navigable, and she chose a vantage point among the gorse bushes, where they could watch without being seen. As midnight approached, Miss Marple, Raymond, Sir Henry, and Craddock took their positions, the quarry's jagged outline looming in. The moonlight, the air was cold, the silence broken only by the rustle of leaves. Miss Marple's eyes were sharp, her shawl wrapped tight against the chill. A figure appeared, Mr. Ellis, his satchel clutched tightly, followed by Mr. Harroway, his limp pronounced. They stopped near a pile of stones, and Ellis handed over a small package, its contents glinting faintly. Craddock's men moved in, their lanterns flashing as they surrounded the pair. "Police," Craddock shouted. "Hands up." Ellis froze. But Haraway bolted, his limp slowing him. Craddock's men caught him quickly, retrieving the package, a ruby brooch, not the Bantry necklace, but clearly stolen. Miss Marple stepped forward, her voice calm. "Mr. Ellis, Mr. Haraway, you've been careless. The smuggling ring is finished." Ellis's face twisted with defiance, but Haraway sagged, his confession spilling out. "It was Gibbs's idea, but I kept it going. The brooch was for a buyer in Bristol. Ellis was just the courier." Miss Marple nodded, her needles clicking in her mind's eye. The newcomer's game was up, but the ring's reach suggested more mysteries to come. For now, St. Mary Mead was safe, and her quiet triumph endured. Chapter 16. The hidden thread. The morning sun rose over St. Mary Mead, its golden rays piercing the lingering mist and casting a warm glow on the village's cobblestone lanes. Miss Jane Marple sat at her breakfast table, her knitting needles clicking in a steady rhythm, a cup of tea cooling beside her. The recovery of the Bantry necklace's sapphire pendant had brought relief to Gossington Hall, and the arrests of Mr. Gibbs, Carver, Mr. Lyle, and Lady Eleanor Vance had dismantled the smuggling ring that had plagued the village. Yet the recent appearance of Mr. Ellis and Mr. Haraway, caught with a stolen ruby brooch at the old quarry, suggested a deeper network, one that had adapted to Gibbs's downfall. Mrs. Price's gossip about Mr. Haraway's connections in Chipping Cleghorn had sparked Miss Marple's curiosity, and she suspected a hidden thread remained, linking the local scheme to a larger criminal enterprise. Today, she resolved to unravel it. Using her quiet persistence and the village's ever-reliable gossip network, Miss Marple donned her tweed coat and black shawl, tucking her knitting into her basket, and stepped into the crisp air. The high street was alive with its usual bustle, Mrs. Puddicombe sweeping her tea-shop step, children laughing on their way to school, and the milkman's cart rattling by. Her first stop was the vicarage, where the Reverend Clement, a friend of long standing, often heard whispers that escaped even Mrs. Price. The vicarage garden was a riot of late summer flowers, and the Reverend greeted her at the gate, his kind face creased with a smile. "Miss Marple, what a pleasure," he said, ushering her inside. "I hear you've worked miracles with the Bantry necklace. The village is singing your praises." Miss Marple waved off the compliment, her blue eyes twinkling. "I only followed the clues, Reverend, but I'm curious about Mr. Haraway, the jeweller from Chipping Cleghorn. I hear he's been seen in St. Mary Mead, and I wondered if you've heard anything about his visits." The Reverend's brow furrowed as he poured tea in the cosy parlour. "Haraway? Yes, he's been to the church a few times, supposedly to admire the stained glass. But I caught him poking about the vestry last week, looking at the donation box. He claimed he was interested in its craftsmanship, but it seemed odd." Miss Marple's needles clicked, her mind seizing on the detail. The vestry, with its locked box and quiet seclusion, was a perfect spot for a discreet drop, much like the church pew where she'd found the coded note. "How curious," she said. "Did he meet anyone, or leave anything behind?" "Not that I saw," the Reverend replied. "But he was with a young man, one sharp-dressed, city type. They spoke in low voices, and the young man left quickly." "I didn't catch his name." Miss Marple's heart quickened, but her face remained serene. The young man was likely Mr. Ellis, confirming their partnership. "Thank you, Reverend," she said, rising. "You've been most helpful." Her next stop was Chipping Cleghorn, a short train ride away, where Mr. Harraway's jewellery shop was a fixture on the high street. Miss Marple had telegraphed Sir Henry Clithering the previous evening, asking for any records on Harraway's dealings, and his reply awaited her at the station, a dossier detailing the jeweller's history of handling questionable gems, though never enough to convict. Armed with this, she entered the shop, its glass cases gleaming with rings and pendants. Mr. Harraway, his limp pronounced, greeted her with a cautious smile. "Good morning, madam. Looking for something special?" Miss Marple smiled, her knitting basket at her feet. "Just browsing, Mr. Harraway. I hear you're the man for rare jewels. I'm visiting from St. Mary Mead, where we've had quite a stir over a stolen necklace." Harraway's smile tightened, his eyes flicking to the door. "St. Mary Mead. I heard about that. Dreadful business. But I deal in legitimate trade, madam." "Of course," Miss Marple said, her tone gentle. "Though I hear you've been seen there, near the post office and the church, and with a young man, Mr. Ellis, perhaps. I'm told you're handling a new piece, something for a buyer in Bristol." Harraway's face paled, his hand gripping the counter. "You've been misinformed," he said, his voice strained. "I don't know any Ellis, and I've no business in St. Mary Mead." Miss Marple's needles clicked, her eyes sharp. "Gossip travels fast, Mr. Harraway, and I know. About the ruby brooch, caught at the quarry. You're part of a larger network, aren't you? One that didn't end with Mr. Gibbs." Harraway's composure cracked, his voice low. "You're meddling in dangerous waters, madame. I'm just a jeweller, trying to make a living. Leave it be." Miss Marple nodded, her smile disarming but her resolve firm. "I'll leave you to your work, Mr. Harraway, but the police are watching, and secrets don't stay hidden long." She left the shop, her thoughts buzzing. Harraway's reaction confirmed his role, but his fear suggested a higher authority, someone directing the network from afar. Back in St. Mary Mead, she met Raymond at the tea shop, where he shared his findings from the Red Lion. Ellis was there again, Aunt Jane, he said, his eyes bright, talking to a woman, not Lady Vance, but someone new. Dark hair, city. Accent, mentioned a boss in Bristol. They're planning another drop tomorrow night at the riverbank. Miss Marple's heart leaped. The riverbank matched the coded note Clara had found. Riverbank Dawn, suggesting a backup plan. Now in motion, she telegraphed Sir Henry, asking him to arrange a police presence with Inspector Craddock, and prepared for another stakeout. The riverbank, a quiet stretch near the old mill, was secluded, perfect for a clandestine exchange. As dawn broke the next day, Miss Marple, Raymond, Sir Henry, and Craddock took their positions among the reeds, the river's gentle flow masking their presence. The mist was thick, cloaking the bank in secrecy. Miss Marple's eyes were sharp, her shawl wrapped tight against the chill. A figure emerged, Mr. Ellis, his satchel in hand, followed by the dark-haired woman Raymond had described. They stopped by a willow, and Ellis handed over a small package, its contents glinting faintly, a diamond ring, not the Bantry necklace, but clearly stolen. Craddock's men moved in, their lanterns flashing. "Police, hands up." Ellis dropped the package, but the woman bolted, only to be caught by a constable. Miss Marple stepped forward, her voice calm. "Mr. Ellis, you're caught in the same web as Mr. Gibbs, who's the boss in Bristol." Ellis's defiance crumbled, his voice shaking. "It's a man called Grayson. Runs a syndicate, moves jewels across England. Harraway works for him, and I was just following orders." Miss Marple nodded, her needles clicking in her mind's eye. The hidden thread Grayson's syndicate explained the ring's resilience. Craddock secured the ring and arrested Ellis and the woman, while Sir Henry turned to Miss Marple, his eyes warm. "Jane, you've done it again. This Grayson will be next, thanks to you." Back in her cottage, Miss Marple sat by the fire, her knitting resuming its rhythm. The Bantry necklace was safe, the smuggling ring dismantled, but Grayson's shadow loomed, a new mystery for another day. For now, St. Mary Mead was quiet, and her triumph was complete. Chapter 17. The syndicate's end. The morning mist clung to St. Mary Mead, softening the village's thatched roofs and cobblestone lanes as Miss Jane Marple sat at her breakfast table, her knitting needles clicking in a steady rhythm. The Bantry necklace was safely back at Gossington Hall, and the smuggling ring led by Mr. Gibbs had been dismantled, with Carver, Mr. Lyle, Lady Eleanor Vance, Mr. Harroway, and Mr. Ellis in custody. Yet the name revealed by Ellis Grayson, a Bristol-based syndicate leader, loomed like a shadow over the case. Miss Marple's instincts told her that Grayson was the hidden thread, the mastermind behind the broader network that had used St. Mary Mead as a hub for stolen jewels. Today, she resolved to bring the syndicate's end, collaborating with Sir Henry Clethering and Inspector Craddock to track Grayson and ensure no further threats lingered in her village. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her eyes on the garden where dew glistened on the roses. A letter from Sir Henry had arrived at dawn, detailing Scotland Yard's findings on Grayson. He was a reclusive figure, operating under the guise of a respectable antiques dealer in Bristol, but known in criminal circles for trafficking rare gems and artifacts. His syndicate had tentacles across southern England, with contacts in London, Chipping Cleghorn, and now St. Mary Mead. Sir Henry proposed a trip to Bristol, where Grayson was rumoured to be preparing a new shipment, possibly to replace the ruby brooch seized at the quarry. Miss Marple agreed, knowing her presence would help connect the village's clues to the larger scheme. She donned her tweed coat and black shawl, tucking her knitting into her basket, and met Raymond at the train station. Her nephew's eyes sparkled with excitement, his notebook already open. "Aunt Jane, we're chasing a crime lord now," he said, his voice low as they boarded the train. "This is bigger than St. Mary Mead. Are you sure you're up for it?" Miss Marple's smile was serene, but her eyes were sharp. "I've faced worse than crime lords. Raymond Gossip can be far more dangerous. We'll observe and listen, as always." The train to Bristol wound through green hills, the city's spires emerging as the mist cleared. Sir Henry and Inspector Craddock met them at the station, Craddock's young face set with determination. "Miss Marple, we've got a lead on Grayson's shop," he said, leading them to a waiting car. "It's in the old quarter, a front for his dealings. We've got plainclothes officers watching, but we need your eye for detail." Grayson's shop, nestled in a narrow street lined with Georgian buildings, was a picture of respectability, its windows displaying antique clocks and silverware. Miss Marple, posing as Mrs. Lavender once more, entered with Raymond, her knitting basket adding to her harmless appearance. The shop was dimly lit, the air heavy with the scent of polished wood and old leather. A clerk, a wiry man with sharp eyes, greeted them. "Good day, madam, sir. Looking for something particular?" Miss Marple smiled, her needles clicking softly. "Just browsing, thank you. My nephew and I are fond of antiques, especially jewels. I hear you've some rare pieces, perhaps from private collections." The clerk's eyes flickered, but his smile remained. "We've a few special items, madam, but thereby appointment only. May I have your name? Mrs. Lavender, she replied, her tone airy. And this is Mr. West, my nephew. We're visiting from St. Mary Mead, where there's been quite a stir over stolen jewels. The clerk's smile tightened, and he excused himself to fetch the manager. Miss Marple's eyes roamed the shop, noting a locked cabinet in the corner, its glass revealing a glint of gemstones. She whispered to Raymond, "That cabinet likely where he keeps the special items. Keep the clerk busy when he returns." Raymond nodded, launching into a barrage of questions about antique clocks as the manager, tall, silver-haired man with a commanding presence, emerged. Miss Marple's heart quickened. This was Grayson, his polished demeanour a mirror to Lyle's. Charm, but with a colder edge. "Mrs. Lavender," he said, his voice smooth, "a pleasure. I understand you're interested in our private collection." "Yes, Mr. Grayson," she said, her needles clicking. "I've heard you handle unique pieces, perhaps from places like St. Mary Mead, a sapphire necklace, for instance, or a ruby brooch." Grayson's eyes narrowed, but his smile held. "You're well informed, madame. We do acquire rare items, but all legitimate. St. Mary Mead, you say? I've heard of the Bantry necklace. A pity it was stolen." Miss Marple's tone remained gentle, but her words were sharp. "Indeed, though I hear it's been recovered, thanks to the postmaster's confession, and a ruby brooch caught at a quarry, linked to a Mr. Harroway and you, perhaps." Grayson's composure faltered, a flush creeping up his neck. "You're mistaken, Mrs. Lavender. I'm a businessman, not a thief. If you'll excuse me, I have another appointment." As he turned, Miss Marple caught sight of a ledger on the counter, its pages open to a list of transactions. She leaned closer, pretending to admire a clock, and glimpsed an entry. "SMM to Bristol, diamond ring, 10/7. The date was recent, and SMM could only mean St. Mary Mead. Before Grayson could notice, Raymond's questions drew him away. Giving Miss Marple a moment to memorize the entry, she signalled Raymond, and they left the shop, meeting Sir Henry and Craddock outside. "It's him," she whispered. "The ledger confirms it Teetums from St. Mary Mead, sent here. He's the head of the syndicate." Craddock nodded, his jaw set. "We'll raid the shop tonight, when he's expecting a delivery. We've got a warrant, thanks to your tip about Ellis." That evening, Miss Marple, Raymond, Sir Henry, and Craddock took positions in an alley across from Grayson's shop, the city's lights casting long shadows. The raid was swift. Craddock's men entered through a back door, their lanterns flashing as they seized ledgers, jewels, and Grayson himself. Miss Marple watched from the alley, her heart steady as the police uncovered a cache of stolen gems, including a diamond ring matching the description from the ledger. Grayson's composure crumbled as he was led out in handcuffs, his eyes meeting Miss Marple's with a mix of defiance and resignation. "You're a clever old bird," he muttered, "but you've only scratched the surface." Miss Marple's smile was serene. "The surface is enough for now, Mr. Grayson. The rest will follow." Back in St. Mary Mead, the village buzzed with the news of the syndicate's collapse. Dolly Bantry hosted a small gathering at Gossington Hall, where the fully restored necklace gleamed in its case. Thomas and Clara, now free from fear, served tea with newfound ease, their gratitude to Miss Marple unspoken but clear. Sir Henry raised a glass, his voice warm, to Jane Marple, who sees what others miss. Miss Marple waved off the toast, her needles clicking. "I only listen, Henry. The village tells its own stories, if you know how to hear them." As the fire crackled, her thoughts lingered on Grayson's parting words. The syndicate was ended, but its echoes remained, a reminder that St. Mary Mead, for all its quiet, was never still. Her needles clicked, ready for the next thread to unravel. Chapter 18. The village restored. The autumn sun cast a gentle glow over St. Mary Mead, its golden light filtering through the lace curtains of Miss Jane Marple's cottage, where she sat by her parlour window, her knitting needles clicking in a steady, comforting rhythm. The Bantry necklace, fully restored, sparkled once more in its fortified case at Gossington Hall, and the smuggling ring that had plagued the village was no more. Mr. Gibbs, Carver, Mr. Lyle, Lady Eleanor Vance, Mr. Harroway, Mr. Ellis, and the elusive Grayson of Bristol were all in custody, their web of deceit unravelled by Miss Marple's quiet persistence and the aid of Sir Henry Clithering and Inspector Craddock. Yet, as she sipped her tea, her blue eyes drifted to the garden, where the roses were fading with the season, and her mind lingered on Grayson's cryptic parting words, "You've only scratched the surface." The case was closed, but St. Mary Mead was never truly still, and Miss Marple knew another mystery would soon stir the village's quiet lanes. The High Street was alive with its familiar, bustle Mrs. Puddacombe arranging cakes in her tea shop. Window, the milkman's cart rattling by, and children laughing as they scampered to school. Miss Marple donned her tweed coat and black shawl, tucking her knitting into her basket, and set out for Gossington Hall, where Dolly Bantry had invited her for a final celebration of the necklace's return. The village was abuzz with pride, the gossip network now weaving tales of Miss Marple's triumph, though she deflected such praise with her usual modesty as she walked. Her thoughts turned to the players in the case. Thomas, the butler, had been spared prosecution in exchange for his testimony, his loyalty to the Bantrys restored by their forgiveness. Clara, the maid, had found her courage, her fear replaced by gratitude for Miss Marple's protection. Mr. Lyle, the charming art dealer, had confessed his role as a middleman, hoping for leniency, while Carver's rough defiance had crumbled under the weight of evidence. Lady Vance, the collector, faced charges in London, her reputation tarnished. Mr. Harroway and Mr. Ellis, caught with the ruby brooch, had led to Grayson, whose Bristol syndicate was now under Scotland Yard's scrutiny. The ledger from Grayson's shop, filled with coded entries, had sealed their fates, revealing a network that stretched across England. At Gossington Hall, the mood was festive, the manor's windows glowing warmly against the autumn chill. Dolly Bantry greeted Miss Marple at the door, her green eyes sparkling with delight. "Jane, you're a miracle worker," she exclaimed, pulling her into a hug. "The necklace is back, the village is safe, and I'm throwing a little tea party to celebrate. Come, everyone's waiting." The drawing room was a cosy scene, with Colonel Bantry, Sir Henry, Raymond, and a few local friends gathered around a tea tray laden with scones and sandwiches. The necklace gleamed in its case, its sapphire catching the light like a captured star. Colonel Bantry raised a cup, his voice hearty, to Miss Marple, who saved our family's pride and shown those criminals what for. Miss Marple smiled, her needles clicking as she settled into a chair. "You're too kind, Arthur. I only listened to the village, and it told me what I needed to know." Sir Henry chuckled, his silver hair catching the firelight. "Jane, you're too modest. Scotland Yard's talking about you as if you're one of their own. Grayson's syndicate was no small catch, and it's all because of your sharp eyes." Raymond, his notebook tucked away, leaned forward, his grin wide. "Aunt Jane, you've outdone every detective story I've ever read. I'm half tempted to write this one up, though no one would believe it." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, but her tone was gentle. "Write what you like, Raymond, but leave out the fuss. The village did the talking, I just paid attention." As the tea party continued, Miss Marple's thoughts drifted to the case's intricacies. The scratches on the display case had first hinted at an inside job, leading her to Thomas. Clara's fear had revealed the coded notes, pointing to the church, pew, and the mill. Gibbs's ledger, Lyle's sapphire ring, and the quarry stakeout had unravelled the local ring, while the London raid and Grayson's shop had exposed the broader syndicate. Each clue had been a stitch, carefully woven into a pattern only she could see, yet Grayson's words nagged at her. "You've only scratched the surface." Was there another layer, a hidden player still at large? She recalled a detail from Mrs. Price's gossiper woman seen with Mr. Ellis at the Red Lion. Not Lady Vance, but someone new, with a city accent and dark hair. The woman had been arrested at the riverbank with Ellis, but her role was unclear, and Grayson's confession had mentioned no one else. Miss Marple's instincts told her to keep watch, for St. Mary Mead's quiet lanes often hid secrets in plain sight. After tea, she strolled back to the village with Raymond, the autumn air cool against her face. As they passed the post office, now under Miss Bates's nervous management, Miss Marple paused, her eyes on a figure lingering by the gaiter woman, dark-haired with a city look about her. She was gone before Miss Marple could approach, but the sight stirred a familiar prickle of curiosity. Back in her cottage, Miss Marple sat by the fire, her knitting resuming its rhythm. She wrote to Sir Henry, mentioning the woman and suggesting a check on recent releases from custody, suspecting she might be a loose thread in Grayson's network. As she sealed the letter, her thoughts turned to the village. The necklace was back, the smugglers caught, but St. Mary Mead was a place of layers. Its piece a fragile veneer over secrets waiting to be uncovered. The next morning, she visited Mrs. Price at the butcher's shop, her pretext a cut of lamb for dinner. The shop was quiet, the scent of sawdust and meat mingling with the hum of gossip. Mrs. Price greeted her with a knowing smile. "Miss Marple, you're the hero of the hour, but there's talk of a new woman in the village scene at the Red Lion, dark hair, city type. Bert says she was asking about you." Miss Marple's needles paused, her heart quickening. "About me? How curious. Did Bert hear anything else?" "Just that she's staying at the Blue Boar," Mrs. Price said, wrapping the lamb. "Said she's a writer, researching village life, but Bert thinks she's up to something. She was too nosy about the post office." Miss Marple thanked her and left, her mind buzzing. A writer at the Blue Boar asking about her echoed Raymond's cover story. But the woman's interest in the post office suggested more than curiosity. She sent Raymond to the inn to investigate, posing as a fellow writer, while she prepared for a quiet evening of reflection. Raymond returned at dusk, his eyes wide. "Aunt Jane, her name's Miss Carter, and she's no writer. She was asking the innkeeper about Gibbs's arrest, and she had a letter with a Bristol postmark. I think she's tied to Grayson." Miss Marple nodded, her needles clicking. "We'll watch her, Raymond. The syndicate's end may not be the end after all." As the fire crackled, Miss Marple's thoughts settled. The village was restored, its peace reclaimed, but Miss Carter's presence was a new thread, one she would follow. With her usual care, St. Mary Mead was quiet for now, but her needles were ready for the next mystery, stitch by careful stitch.